If I can call Basil to the front, please. Yeah, please sit down, Basil. And if you've got any extra material you'd like to circulate, give it to Louise.
Good afternoon, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity to come here and vent my frustration at this proposed plan. We farm near Darfield, 40 hectares, so we're a small farm. We got 7.5 hectares in walnut trees, which is a few months away for being fully certified organic. We got 26 years roughly in pasture where we raise dairy beef on. The remainder predominantly is in shelter trees. As farmers, we have to live with our own means. We cannot pass on any increase in any cost to our products we sell. So we can't just load it up onto our walnuts or onto our beef prices. And farmers in here would understand that the same applies to them, whether it's dairy, whether it's wool, whether it's meat. So why does the council not follow the same principle? Why are the council not living with its own means? We got to make it happen. Why aren't you? If we haven't got spare money to invest in an upgrade on a tractor, we just have to carry on with what we have. And if there's no surplus money, like this year, probably there'll be no holiday for a change, like it was last year. We wouldn't have an issue with your proposal if it was linked to an inflation index or CPI. I think that would be fair to accept this increase. And councillors, you need to ask your key staff, is the operation run here efficient? Are there no double ups or overlaps with other industry, government initiatives, strategies, and such like? And may I just say, with the experience I've had this last 12 months, I have got reservation about some of the competency of staff here and how efficient they operate, which, when it comes back to us, we got to pay another cost if they have to go back to the paperwork and actually say, oh yes, that's right, it was here, I missed that. So ECAN already has a functional water strategy, Canterbury water management strategy, that has buy-in from farmers, and I think it's well supported and has shown good results. ECAN has had every opportunity and right to push back the essential freshwater package that was demanded by central government. You've got something in place here which works, buy more. And if they insist on it, let them pay for it, not us. On our property, we have soil moisturing probes to determine the frequency and application rate of irrigation required. So we're not wasting water because we've got to pay for the pumping of it. We're run on a well. The well is monitored and telemetric information exchanged here to council. Our fertiliser program consists of compost, which we receive or purchase from Living Earth, which is, I guess, shitty waste. It works well for us. We do, at strategic time in spring and autumn, give a top up of urea to make sure that we've got sufficient feed on hand for our beef animals. We do not get a carbon credit for our shelter trees or our walnut trees. And I know that's not your department, but so many other government agencies. Very sorry to hear that, but it's the way it is. We also note that the environment plan, as requested now, is only requested from farmers. It's not requested from industries, businesses, whether they be small or large. It's not requested from urban dwellers. Why farming only? Everyone has got a footprint. Everyone's participation in living around here has got an effect on the water. We do not support both proposals. What is 240 million and 246 million, in my view, and the principle, is unacceptable. We ask you, as councillors, what is the benefit to us? What is the proposal you put forward? What does it mean for us? What is the benefit we've got to gain? There should be some gain for us as well. Or is the big picture to tax farmers off their land so that New Zealand becomes a big national park, a playground for the rich and famous? Thank you.
Thanks, Basil. Any questions? Lan.
Thanks for your submission, Basil. My question was just about a comment you made about the environmental plan just being focused at farmers. Do you interpret our planning to be just being focused at farmers? Is that what you're saying?
The farm environment plan, yes.
Peter?
Thank you. So have you got 40 hectares of walnuts? 40 hectares of walnut trees?
No, we got 7.5 hectares in walnut trees, around 1,000 trees. Some are recent plantings, some are a bit more mature, and about 26 of the 40 hectares is in pasture where we graze beef. We raise beef, dairy beef, but we're not making a living what we're doing. We're drawing on our savings.
I guess my interest in that is around carbon. 7.5 hectares, and how long will those walnut trees be in the ground?
The oldest would be coming up to 20 years. The youngest one, if we talk about plantings, would be 9 years, but we've had a few deaths which have been replaced.
How long will they last?
So, Peter, is this relevant to the LTPs?
Yeah,
the point I'd like to make with carbon footprint is there's a number of orchards. It doesn't necessarily mean to be walnut orchards. There is apple orchards. I know of walnut orchards got close canopy and they get no recognition for the carbon absorption.
Thanks, Basil, and thank you for your submission. And thanks for coming in to make that submission. And now Anthony Raizis is here. You have 10 minutes. Yeah.
Essentially focusing on the climate and biodiversity crisis, and a little bit about what I'm trying to do, which is, in the scheme of things, probably not much, but it's more possibly than the average person. And I think what the idea is that I want us to be able to get away from a bad image of humans being essentially Homo pollutus sapiens. That seems to be our main contribution to nature at the moment. Either greenhouse gases, deforestation, landfill, biodiversity loss, all that kind of stuff. So my main concern is trying to reverse that process, make us more environmentally conscious and aware, and perhaps try and do something about the climate crisis. And for centuries now, we've had this relentless process of converting forests to pasture, and it's on an enormous scale. If you look at pastoral land globally, it's around 3.4 billion hectares. And it's been traditionally replaced by some crops, but obviously pastoral land is a very significant replacement. And from the studies that I've seen, pastoral land is also, okay, so from the point of view of soil carbon sequestration, which is a big part of what my talk is going to be about, there seems to be a net loss of even that when you convert to pastoral land, according to that study. And what you need to also be aware is that 63% of total agricultural land is pastoral land, but that only produces 7% of the total food supply calories in the world. So that's not, from that point of view, it's not as efficient as other forms of agriculture. So the good news, if you can consider it good news, is that forest soil carbon can sequester an enormous amount of carbon, essentially. And this graph, or this table, basically shows that if you compare whether it be boreal, temperate or tropical forests, they have enormous amounts of sequestration capacity. And New Zealand is mainly temperate, but even there, it can be up to 80% of the capacity to store carbon is in the soil. And that by far exceeds anything that I've seen in terms of carbon sequestration capacity of pastoral land. So this is my property, and this tree kind of tells a bit of a story. It's kind of unique because it's a Pinus radiata that fell in the strong winds of September 2013. And you can see that it's been left there for over 8 years, which is one of the few cases where I've actually seen anyone leave a fallen tree to decompose on their land. It's always used for something. They rip it up and it's either used for fuel or something. So this is one of the rare occasions where it's been left. So the story this kind of tells is that the reason that tree fell is not just because there was a strong wind. It was because there was a lot of rainfall that year. So the soils were very waterlogged. And so the root structures were weakened by that. But since then, we haven't had anything like that amount of rainfall. And it seems to be steadily getting worse. So what that means is that in my case, if I want to do a native restoration project, I have to think about ways of how am I going to restore these natives with less and less rainfall, given that the climate is changing. So how do we do that? I mean, one way is potentially water storage and pivot irrigators, but I don't have that kind of money to do that. So I have to look at other ways of being able to do that. And one of the ways is to stop the water from evaporating or slow it down as much as possible by letting the vegetation that's there just overgrow. And that provides a shelter for the natives. And so the vegetation that I've got there is essentially what everyone considers the enemy: pines, gorse, broom, and tall grasses. But they are highly effective as nursing plants in restoring natives. They do the job. They grow quickly. They sequester carbon quickly. And if you chop them down and leave them to decompose, they can add fairly quickly carbon back into the soil. And Pinus radiata has been studied quite extensively. We know how much carbon that picks up and stores. It's in the order of 27 tons of carbon per hectare over a, say, 30-year rotation. So it's well studied. Now, a lot of people are against pines for a number of reasons. You're probably all familiar with those. But I have actually looked at other tree species, and given the treacherous conditions out there, things like tree lucerne, they just simply do not survive. The frosts, the dry conditions. So there were pines already there. I've just allowed them to grow, and they are doing their job. And there's no reason why natives can't be reintroduced back amongst the pines. And it's not just me who suggested it. Ewan Mason from Canterbury University has also suggested it as an idea, that you get the best of both worlds. You get the rapid carbon sequestration and the ability to put natives back in amongst them and let them grow, and then manage the pines later on. And you can, as I say, you can do that by just chopping them down and just letting them decompose and allowing the soil to absorb all the carbon that they've produced. So that's kind of like an old picture in the background. There is what the land looked like. And I've just basically described all those things, and I'm just finding already that the kānukas are surviving quite well amongst the seedlings. They would otherwise perish in the direct sunlight, so they need shade in order to survive. So that's Totaras are doing very well. And where I can, I'm putting kānuka as well, but what I've noticed is because of the dry conditions, the kānukas are going very slowly. Even though kānuka traditionally are a really good plant for a nursing plant, but they're just very slow. And even Hugh Wilson would admit that if you let natives grow, it would take about 30 years before they become fully established. And scientists have said we've only got 10 years to actually do something about climate. So that's essentially what we're trying to do, is fast track the process and take the pressure off the natives for growing rapidly. So as I say, by allowing the plants simply to grow, tall grasses, gorse and other things, they are actually, on the one hand, they are preventing other worse weeds like Scotch thistle from growing, which are even more nasty. They have also just about finished. It's also made less habitable for cats who are on the hunt for skinks around the area. And as I say, given that there's no significant rainfall in the area, they have provided a reasonable amount of shade that we can add these native plants. So the other issue that keeps being bandied about in the media is about wildfires. I would just make the point, based on the study, that 99.9% of all wildfires is due to human activities, 0.1% due to natural causes like lightning strikes. And the issue about fire breaks around boundaries, to me, is minor, very minor compared to the amount of fire we could prevent with better education and getting people to do the things that are less likely to start fires. And that just gives you an indication of my land on the left and my nearby property on the right, which is extensively farmed. It's not irrigated. And you can see that because of the dry season, that the grasses are basically, dried out. Whereas in my case, because they're allowed to be grown tall, there's still a lot of green pasture there. So it's telling us that it's doing a good job of keeping the moisture in the soil. So that's the summary there.
Thanks to Anthony. You've gone over time, so we've got time for just one question from you, Liz.
Great, thanks, Anthony. It wasn't clear to me from your presentation what you want from us in the long-term plan. So what I want to know is, are you after something like funding for community communication, or what? What do you want? What do you want?
Would like people to just please legitimise what I'm doing and not consider me like a nuisance, because there's actually a rationale and a very and noteworthy purpose behind what I'm doing, whereas I'm getting just a lot of flack from everywhere, and that's basically where I'd like ECAN to assist me in that point of view. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Anthony, and thank you for coming and presenting your submission. If I now call Bruce Baldwin to the front, and it's submission 528. Same rules, Bruce. 10 minutes.
Good afternoon. I've come here today to speak against the proposed levy on swing mooring holders to recover costs in the salvage of wrecks and abandoned vessels. The proposal for this levy may have come from a fishing vessel which grounded on Brighton Beach, which was in transit from Otago to Picton in the last 12 months. The owner claimed that he had sold the vessel, but the new owner could not be found. As the proposal stands at the moment, the 170 berth holders in Littleton Harbour Marina and 24 berth holders in a Diamond Harbour pile moorings, as well as approximately 10 more in the Magazine Bay Marina, would not be levied. So approximately 200 vessels in Littleton Harbour would not come under this levy. These vessels are just as likely to be wrecked, abandoned, as was demonstrated recently when a motor launch from Littleton Marina caught fire and was burnt to the waterline adjacent to Quail Island. This proposal is targeting a small group of law-abiding swing mooring holders to cover the potential cost of owners which may or may not be a registered occupant of a swing mooring. This proposed levy will only encourage irresponsible behaviour of some boat owners if ECAN will pick up the cost involved in salvaging their vessel. So for these reasons, ECAN should drop this heavy-handed proposed tax on a small number of recreational boaties, which would only further erode the poor relationship between many swing mooring holders and the environment Canterbury. So it's pretty short and straight to the point.
Thanks, Bruce. And you've got, are those notes different to your, if you could contact the team on your way out to make sure that you can send it on, that'd be much appreciated.
Thanks for that. Just trying to understand the difference between the 200 boats or owners that you talked about and the swing mooring. Can you tell us a little bit?
Well, there's 170 vessels in the Littleton Harbour Marina, so they're not on swing moorings, they're on fixed moorings, and the same for the Diamond Harbour pile moorings, and the old Magazine Bay berths are also on pile moorings. So they won't come under this this new levy, just the swing moorings, yeah.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for coming in and submitting. And I'll now ask Andrea Chalmers to come up.
Thanks very much for your time.
And again, Andrea, if your notes are any different, thanks, Basil. If your notes are any different to your written submission, could you make sure that they go to the team in the, yeah, or email it through to. That's cool. Thank you.
Good afternoon all, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to my submission on ECAN's long-term plan. Today I wish to expand on what I feel are the significant challenges and opportunities for Canterbury and the reason why I chose the other option regarding the size of rate increase. My name is Andrea Chalmers, and along with my husband Neville, daughter Lee and her husband Mark, and 3 other full-time staff members, 5 families in total, we farm south-east of Ashburton. Parkfields is a 765 hectare farm, as well as we lease a further 100 hectares. We're predominantly arable farming, this year growing cereals, wheat, barley, rye corn, annual and perennial ryegrasses, fescue, plantain, brown top, Yorkshire fog, peas, beans, linseed, rape, kale, sunflowers, and least a paddock for potatoes. Crops are grown on rotation, availability, profitability and seasonal weather. We also farm sheep, bull beef and graze dairy stock on contract. Significant challenges and opportunities Canterbury face, matching ideology with reality. I start with the challenges. A significant challenge is a continuity of family farms. There currently is a worldwide attack on farmers, whether it's over emissions, water, fertiliser, pesticides, stock, etc. The media constantly concentrates on the perceived negatives, but rarely do we see any articles that positively highlight the proven advances farmers have made and are continually making. I urge you to watch the excellent YouTube clip, The Road to Change, Rabobank, it's a Dutch one. It's only 5 minutes, but it shows us the changing face of agriculture since the wars and sums up the challenges farmers face, from hero to zero, and how farmers have changed farming practices over the years through research, knowledge and science. Canterbury is made up of many rural communities, and these are supported by farming families. many on multi-generational farms. They bring stability to a community, whether it's the local school, church, sports groups, etc., and are valuable in times of disaster. Our local school runs the annual Long Beach Coastal Challenge, which last year raised $26,000, profits going back to the community and school. Overton Memorial Hall celebrated its 75 years anniversary at Anzac weekend with an Anzac service in function, which was attended by many locals who are still farming in the area and who have family members listed on the roll of honour boards. However, increasing compliance and rising costs is making it hard for the family farm, with some selling out to larger farming co-ops. While some corporate farms answer to shareholders and profit, we answer to our families. Our farm are our future and our biggest asset. It is our interest to ensure we farm to best practice and to protect the land so the next generation can continue. I know on our farm that the land is continuing to improve due to the availability to be able to incorporate new technology and farm practices as they become available through science and technology. We also need to ensure we are profitable to be able to make these changes, as there is an old saying that goes, you can't farm green when you're in the red. It's widely acknowledged that by 2050, the estimated world population will have increased by 2.5 billion people, requiring an extra 50 to 70% food. The one thing that is really talked about is how the world is going to be fed if farmers are forced to reduce stock numbers, grow less crops and produce less food. Here lies the opportunity for Canterbury. We have good soils, favourable climate, plentiful with water and great farmers. Opportunities include water storage along with sensible management of resources that allow all four pillars, economic, environment, social and culture, to be in proportional balance. Water storage does not have to mean more intensive agriculture. To me, water storage is no different than the aisles of canned, dried and frozen food found in the supermarket, to preserve when plentiful for availability when times are lacking. Canterbury receives times of high rainfall, with the majority going out to sea. If we could harness some of that water and be used recreational during storage and then released back down the rivers during the dry periods, would allow the continually of growing crops and food that is used both locally and for export. To grow a successful crop, it requires water and nutrients in the right amounts at the right time. As farmers, we pay for our own water infrastructure, household stock and irrigation. This year, we've had to replace 2 pumps, which also supplies domestic water at roughly $50,000 each. Out of interest, we've had our drinking water tested for nitrates in the last 2 years. 2 out of 3 wells have decreased, with the 1 well increasing showed a level of 2.1. Over the past 12 years, we've upgraded from rotoranas to laterals at a cost of approximately $200,000 per unit, a total of 8. To make these huge financial commitments, we need to know that our consents are secure for the length of time granted. Affordable and reliable water is crucial for the continuation of farming in Canterbury. I challenge anyone with a vegetable garden to rely solely on Mother Nature to produce export quality produce. Please don't allow Canterbury to be turned into a giant pine plantation. It is far too beautiful, with good productive soils growing a huge variety of agricultural products. People need food. We can't live on tree and carbons, nor should we be importing food from places like Spain. Again, Google Spain, serve plastics, and you'll see why. Last week, in doing accounts, I paid invoices to over 50 different businesses and received income from 12. These are businesses that employ people all over Canterbury, from large firms to owner-operators. Convert to trees, and many of these businesses will not be needed by farmers. What proposed option I'd like to see? Our present regional rate for the 2021 period is $17,700, plus with Ashburton District Council rates of $29,000, it makes a combined rate bill of $46,800. I realise that we aren't talking total rates, however, they are invoiced together, and that is what I see we pay. The proposed rate rises increase for the 2021 period payment of either an extra $12,600 or $11,400 is totally unaffordable. And as there's little difference between the options, I will use option A in my examples. This equates to an additional $243 per week on top of the $340 we are already paying. That's $583 per week just for ECAN rates. In 2017-18 period, our regional rates was $11,221, which is $215 a week. So in 4 years, we've been subject to an increase greater than 170%. In the Stuff article on March 26, ECAN Chair Jenny Hewley said that the proposed rate rise was not as bad as they looked, with the actual dollar figure comparatively little for most rate payers, especially those in Christchurch, where a 3% was expected if a higher rate hike was approved. By comparison, an Ashburton farm with 4.96 million, the total rate payable under the high proposed increase would be $4,678, a much steeper increase of of $735.85 a year. Under this scenario, our increase should be $4,410, and not the $12,600. It will be under option A. Our annual bill will not be $22,060 per year as stated, but $30,288. That's an extra $8,000. With a 6.5 district council rate proposed increase would equate to a total bill of $62,313, or $1,198 per week. What business can afford this, and what other businesses in Canterbury are facing rates so high? This brings me around to the sub-regional plans by 2023-24. I've actively followed the Canterbury Land and Water Plan since its conception back around 2010. It is extremely disappointing that ECAN has not pushed back on this and have appeared to have written off the $60 million investment they have made, along with the other $60 million that industry has made to get this plan operating and still working through. Why is it necessary to go back to the drawing board, especially in such a tight time frame when experience shows that this will be nigh impossible? Yes, the existing plan may need some amendments, but to start again, ECAN needs to have central government acknowledge the work and investment already undertaken by the rural community and allow us to spend our money on practical solutions rather than box-ticking exercise. From my own experience, I've spent many days and countless hours over the past 10 years attending meetings and workshops, writing policies and plans, implementing and having the plan audited. Now ECAN is telling us that that was all for nothing and to start again. This sees us paying us several times over. First time for ECAN to write the policy, second for us to meet the policy, and third time to have be audited on the policy. Costs incurred for farm audits have included consultants, overseer modelling, which is a nightmare for an arable stock farm system, and then continued costs updating due to version updates and audits. Continued soil monitoring as 40 years of practical farming and knowing when a plant requires water and a spade doesn't count. So instead we need to spend $5,000 every year to tick a box, and then Mother Nature can blow that out by delivering more or less than forecasted. Increasing monitoring charges, and the list goes on. I'm afraid there's going to be consent needed for many of our permitted activities. Afraid of not complying, but because of the $2,900 deposit required for each consent. Drains. We live in the Hines drainage area and our farm is at the coastal end of these drains, so when we do have significant rain events, we end up with everyone else's water. The drains can't cope, hence we do get a lot of erosion. Some of these drains begin in our property, so we're not talking about a huge catchment. Once managed by drainage catchment boards who regularly maintain the drains with weirs, erosion control, etc. In the past 10 to 15 years, very little has been done regarding drain maintenance. In the 2021 rate period, 4,600 of our rates went to the drains, yet maintenance at our end has been zilch. Where has that 4,600 we paid last year gone, and where is the 4,600 plus we'll be paying this year going? These drains have been dry for approximately the last 18 months, and then previously for long spells before that. This could be due to the move away from flood water dike irrigation to more efficient little and often irrigation, piping of stock water along the continued closure of district stock water races. Why can't this money being deducted from landowners be used for the Mar project, which is targeted rates? I have this perception that people see farmers as being rich and therefore can afford to pay more than their fair share of rates. However, due to ECAN now charges on a user pay system, this sees us being invoiced for customer services at $105 an hour and consent planning officers at $166 an hour. Yes, land values have increased astronomical in the past years. However, a figure on a piece of paper doesn't pay the bills, and that price is only realised if you sell. In 1989, we received $400 a tonne for milling wheat. This month, 32 years later, I'll be invoicing feed wheat at $385. It has only been with the security of water and science that we've been able to increase yields, that we have been able to continue to farm at these farm gate prices. Yes, we could have farmed for better returns. Dairying would have enabled us to do that. However, arable is my husband's expertise, which belies the theory that farmers just farm for as much profit as they can. Farmers are price takers. We do not set the price for our goods. We manage our finances by doing budget and working out what is profitable and limiting our spending to match. This is exactly how ECAN should be managing their finances. Set a rate rise of 6 to 8% and work within it, just as we do.
Thanks, Andrea. A lot of stuff delivered at a very fast pace. You managed to just sneak in under the 10 minutes, so well done. We've got copies. Phil.
Thanks, Andrea.
just wondering altogether in terms of the rating systems, that in fact, given that because your property will be quite a valuable property, in effect, because the capital value, that's what the rating is based on. So I'm just wondering if there'd be any other preference for you as to how, say, the tax system, taxes or rates might be able to be applied better. So it would be a better way of arriving at what we need in terms of the huge amount of money which at times is required by a regional council.
Well, I'm not a great expertise in that, but I think that uniform rates, which at the moment, you know, we're being paid $25 per property, and I know that's going up more, but even if that was brought up even further and spread, and spread the cost, land values, I mean, they're just astronomical. And I mean, a business in town that may have a bigger turnover than us are not being lumped with that. So I don't know what is a fair way, but I think just be judged on land value, because it doesn't make the money. It's how you farm it. And as I said, you can go better ways, but no, sorry.
Thank you, Andrea, for coming up and presenting. Thank you for that. There are no more questions, so I'll now call Ian Duff, please. Ian, it's 10 minutes. If you've got any additional material, you could give it to the team at the back of the room and push the red button when you want to talk.
Okay, can you hear me now? Because I've got a pretty weak voice today. Okay. Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for hearing my brief submission. My submission is different to the initial one drafted, so I'll make sure I get a copy out there. But again, mine is on the draft long-term plan relating to swing moorings. Personally, I've had a swing mooring, 3 different locations, 3 different jurisdictions for 53 years. In other words, literally, my first mooring was just before the Waihoa-Wainono storm in 1968, and we survived that. And more recently, my mooring has been in French Farm in Akara, and we've survived all storms. Basically, I want to emphasise here that I have always done my own maintenance religiously, and I've had 0 problems. So I think I should be regarded as a reasonably competent observer. Okay, well, my submission is this. My area of concern in the 10-year draft plan is contained on page 268 under the heading of swing mooring charges as follows. And then swing mooring charges, bullet point number 1, swing mooring annual fee for administration, supervision and monitoring, $230 per year. That obviously includes GST. And then the second bullet point is swing mooring annual fee towards removal of wrecks/abandoned vessels from swing moorings of $57.50 per year. All right, well, the first of these 2 charges at $230 per annum was until 2 years ago exactly half that sum. It remains a dubious proposition as to whether the quality and competence of administration, supervision and monitoring has in tandem improved by 100% as a result of the 100% increase in the fees. The second fee proposal of $57.50 per annum for the stated purpose of, in quotes, being towards removal of wrecks, abandoned vessels from swing moorings, close quotes, crept into the draft 10-year plan by stealth and was not preceded by any consultation with swing mooring holders. It is this second fee that I wish to see struck out of the draft 10-year plan because it is essentially unfair and in reality is simply an example of a natural monopoly milking a cash cow via the swing mooring database. Unfairness essentially arises because under the proposed regime, responsible boat owners will be subsidising the irresponsible. It also needs to be noted that vessels on pile moorings and for that matter marina berths will not be levied. The more notable wrecks along the Canterbury coast in recent years have largely been the result of commercial vessels on autopilot running onto a beach or crashing into rocks or cliff faces. In all cases, the man on the wheel was fast asleep. It's the usual problem. Commercial vessels have large fuel tanks and large quantities of hydraulic and lube oil on board as well, so the environmental damage when they come to grief is hugely greater than the risk associated with recreational vessels on swing moorings. In closing, I think it is appropriate to briefly touch on a wider cultural issue within ECAN that was emphasised for me by my participation in March and April at 2 one-day workshops held at Amberley regarding the management of Nacella tussock. This is a long way away from swing moorings, but it's a cultural thing. The workshops were put together very constructively by the biosecurity section of ECAN. At those workshops, over 50% of the inputs and draft solutions were to reverse a perception of arrogance felt by many farmers towards ECAN. I also had a quick look this morning at how much the ECAN portion of rates on our humble property had risen in a year of no valuation change. I was appalled to find that our ECAN rates had, this is the ECAN only, had escalated from $792.70 to $980.20 from the year ended 2019 to the year ended 2020. That increase in just 1 year was an astonishing 23.65%. So really, ECAN has to get control of these out-of-control costings that you're imposing on people. I mean, I'm a bloody pensioner these days. I don't get 23.6% increases in my pension to cover my costs, and my limited term deposits only yield 0.4% at the moment. So, you know, you people have to learn to live with within your income, your proper income, rather than just charged cost-plus madness. And then finally, please strike out the unfair, ill-researched $57.50 per annum swing mooring surcharge. Any questions?
Thank you, Ian. And your point about the mooring charges has been well made by you and by other submitters. Questions? Looks like you've done such a sterling job that you've stunned them all into silence. Thanks. Thank you for coming in, Ian. Now we have Greg Clydesdale.
Who has a PowerPoint?
Who has a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Cool. Same rules, Greg. 10 minutes, and push the button to get the red light on.
My expertise is not technology, it's economics. My PhD is in economics. This one?
Yeah.
Cool. I'm a bit different to other economists. I'm not a number cruncher. I draw more on psychology. You'll see my current book and press is actually on government policies. And it's often interesting seeing why government policies fail. It's often psychological. You notice one of my top books is actually on human nature. You see, when people are strung by an ideology, for example, they'll refuse to see evidence that goes against the ideology. Also, in terms of policy, do governments pay a significant evidence to opinions or evidence that goes against what they believe? Are we genuinely as open as we think we are? And all the research on cognitive psychology says we're not open. We stick to paradigms, and we're very strongly driven by them. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this headline before, that ECAN is not achieving its bus goals. And whenever, I think the goal was 20 million and we had about 11 million, admittedly there was COVID, that's a big failure. That's just not we slightly missed our goals. That suggests there's something seriously wrong with the underlying assumptions. This isn't just a case of, oh, I got something slightly wrong, we need to... This is a case for totally reconfiguring our assumptions. So one of the first things I did, if we want to reduce carbon use in Canterbury, I contacted the Livingston Port Company. How much oil use has declined since the government's, the City Council and planners have introduced a lot of changes. And the first thing I discovered is we actually haven't decreased our oil imports. We've actually increased our oil consumption. You'll see it's at 11.13%, and that's just in 6 years. Admittedly, in that time, we've had population growth, so I took that into account. And still, oil consumption per capita has actually increased, despite all our efforts to get people on buses and bicycles and stop using cars. So I then, there's exogenous factors in play here. People have moved out to Rolleston and Pegasus. Although, take a note that my starting figure is 2013. The red zone was already cleared. I was still living in the red zone at the time. On the other hand, in favour of reduced oil consumption is the fact that cars are more efficient. You take your average two-hour controller, in those 6 years, there's a 11.5% increase. Effectively, if the council had done nothing, we would have seen some improvement in oil consumption just from that. But as opposed to discouraging car use, there's actually no evidence that city councils or the urban planners' policies has had any effect. You can see in that 6 years, per average car ownership's nearly doubled in 6 years. So, and this is not ECAN, here's the city council. What might have contributed? Why are we driving more cars? Why are we using more petrol? And a lot of it is simply the fact is the city council, the urban planners have made it harder for us to drive to town. So, if you can't drive to town, here's an example. One business located in town before the earthquake moved to Hornby, where they had 10 car parks outside their shop. It was so successful with people driving to their shop, they then set up another shop in Papanui, which had 15 car parks, and their manager told me they'll never return to the city. The city council, by trying to encourage discouraging cars and relying on buses and bikes, thought, we're reducing carbon usage. But what they did is they didn't discourage people taking cars, they discouraged businesses from moving into the city. So they actually encouraged people to use oil and to drive cars. The policies, the bus biking policy was counterproductive. We now have more cars than ever before, and we now are using more oil per capita than ever before. So businesses are now dispersed all over the city. That encourages car use, cars per capita. If we look at the figures, we're failing to achieve our bus goals dramatically. Instead of reducing car ownership, it's increased. Instead of reducing oil use and our contribution to climate change, we've actually increased our contribution to climate change. Council policies have been counterproductive. And it's based on a lot of, and the reason you've got to look right back to the assumptions on which this is based. There's this belief that bus use has declined because of a failure to invest in buses, whereas the truth is bus companies reduced investment because demand was falling. Buses can't compete with cars in terms of time, carrying a load. They're not restricted by use, convenience. There's too much of an emphasis on price as a competitive factor and the idea that if you make it cheaper, they will come. No, I'm not going to get up out of bed earlier for half an hour so I can travel for an hour to get to work. It's time is the currency, that not an extra $4 a day. I'd rather sleep in. This is the mentality of Christchurch. You might dislike my mentality, and I've certainly met council officers who criticise Christchurch people for failing them, because they don't realise they have not got in the heads of the Christchurch people. They have not got handled the businesses. Now, I think you have to acknowledge your bus policies. You haven't achieved your goals. 11 million, aim for 20 million. The idea of returning to the days of bicycles and buses, you've got to remember why we turned away from bicycles and buses. We turned away because they couldn't compete. Instead of looking backwards to old technologies, you have to acknowledge that we are in the 21st century. So personally, I think you guys need to take a deep think again, take a deep breathing space. Because if you increase money, increase debt and high rates, not only is your policy going to fail yet again, that you reduce our chance to fight climate change in the future when more effective options will appear and technologies will get better in the future. Increase rates, get in debt, you're tying our hands for the future. Technology options aren't that great at the moment, so take a breath And if you are going to spend millions of dollars, you must be certain that you will actually achieve your goals of fighting climate change. And I'm certainly not convinced that you're going to achieve your goals of fighting climate change with continuing with this bus bike policy. I don't know how much time I've got, but I was kind of hoping to 2 minutes. Can I just say something about an earlier submission, I think it was last week? Quail Island was put in about deer crossing at low tide. I just want to say something about the low tide. Those mudflats are man-made. It's not natural. At the end of the 19th century, and we came along, we cut all the trees down. The roots of the trees were holding the soil together. The soil goes straight into the harbour. The rate of accretion into the harbour has been phenomenal. Those mudflats are man-made. And I'm not going to have enough time to go into detail, but you can see the Littleton Port Company's records say that we've lost 2.5 metres of water in the head of the harbour. If we're going to restore Quail Island, why can't we restore the upper harbour? Get it back to the waterways of what it used to be. You know, this would restore Ngaitahu fisheries up at Rapaki. You could create a fantastic conservation recreation park linking Quail Island, Moapuka Peninsula, Alton Bradley. Put forest on Moapuka. You have fantastic flight corridors. Fantastic. You know, there need to be dredging, but you don't need the big ship dredging that the Littleton Port Company used. Just a smaller dredge working more regularly, similar to you have in the Avon River a few years ago. You could, you know, there's golden sand beaches protected from the easterly. Not only is it good for conservation, not only is it good for biodiversity, but in terms of recreation values, it would be spectacular. And I know I'm running out of time.
Thanks, Greg. I suspect there may be some sympathy for your later comments. Questions, Peter?
So in terms of your comments on buses, what do you say to the transport poor of Christchurch?
What do I say?
To the transport poor of Christchurch. Your button, Greg.
In terms of, in which respect?
Well, public transport being a public service, in terms of transport poor and those people that can't access cars, bikes or other means of transport, what do you say to them in terms of, you know, changing the service, if you like?
Oh, I think we just need to totally redo our strategies. I don't think it's not simple. It's not simple, and I think our policies of bus bike have been very simplistic. I think it's been driven by an ideology. And I think everyone wants to fight climate change. I don't know anyone who wants to increase climate change. I don't know anyone with that mentality. I think, look, we can't waste money on things that don't work. I think we need to go back to the drawing board, get rid of our initial assumptions, and start with no assumptions.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Greg, for your presentation. Good to catch up again. My question was a bit the same. So if we can't achieve transport goals today in the interim, what are those strategies that you might suggest? Or, yeah, basically.
I would want to actually.
Yeah, get your.
Oops.
Yeah.
I would want to have a look at every evidence available before I answer that question thoroughly. There's no doubt about it. The City Council aren't going to like what I'm going to say, but when you look at cars getting more efficient and more electric cars on the road, if they had done nothing, we would have had more improvement than what they've done. You know, their spending our consumption's gone up on a per capita basis too, not just on a total basis, but on a per capita basis. One of the problems you've had, and you guys know this better than me probably, the best system for buses is that hub and spoke relationship. And to get that hub and spoke relationship going, you need businesses in the centre of the city. And the City Council's policies have led to dispersal, which has made that model no longer work. I'm sure your own planners have told you this. I'm sure I'm telling you nothing new. I always feel like apologising to you, Phil, because I know this is your baby, but I really do think you need to take a breather on this one.
Thanks, Greg. We've just got one more quick question from Vicky. Quick question, please.
Yeah, I was interested in, you said there aren't good technologies, but I would say electric bikes. You said bikes are old, let's not go back there, but actually electric bikes.
Quick question.
So the question is, what place do you see electric bikes? Would you consider something like subsidising bikes, electric bikes, instead of, but bearing in mind what Councillor Scott just talked about in terms of many people will not be able to afford electric cars. If you can't afford an electric car and there's no bus, what's your alternative? So, you know, what's the idea?
Yeah, very good question. I was actually going through my head for how many electric cars could we subsidise by $10,000 for the same amount of money we're throwing into buses or urban planning. We do actually have lots of options. I mean, that's the thing. We're not devoid of options. And yeah, all my friends are just getting into electric bikes at the moment, and I'm sure I'll eventually be bitten as well. They're a great alternative. I just think we need to be more imaginative and a bit more sophisticated. And I'm not going to give you a simple answer off the top of my head because I think the problem is not simple, it's more sophisticated.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you for your submission. I think it was a very refreshing submission, and your points are noted. And if I can now call Diana Shan to the front, please. This is submission 1026. 10 minutes, Diana. The bell will go off at 9.
Okay, am I on? Right. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's great to be here. Some of you will know that I actually was elected to the Regional Council in 1989. One of my first experiences was being handed a paper from the OECD about the importance of transport, and seeing I'd just drawn the short straw and being on the transport interest area, I started to get very interested in the enormous impact and ramifications that transport have in dictating so much in terms of our social environment and our physical environment. We actually were in the old catchment building at that time, and I had the alarming experience when we actually determined that we would get rid of the hub and spoke experience and clear out the square, which was becoming incredibly congested, of being stormed by, I think there was estimated about 50 people that came to eject to the square, being cleared, stopped being the centre of the hub and spoke, and the new plans that were to be put in. Now, we had an extraordinary good transport staff, and they did a lot of research, and we ended up with a proposal that we would have circular routes that actually joined up with where people wanted to go. They determined that people wanted to go to certain places, schools, swimming, recreation centres, shopping centres, and these needed to be joined up in bus routes. Hub and spoke didn't always serve this. Then you had the situation that the research showed that you needed to deal with frequency, coverage, speed, and image. At one stage in one consultation, the bus service was described like a grunty old bachelor with a pot belly and smoking all the time. So consequently, we have a very different kind of image in our buses now, and we got those wonderfully David Thornley designed sexy fronts, which were copied for the Toyota Olympics, incidentally, and we actually did change the image of the buses. And my next experience was being stormed, another very large delegation that came to the city council, to the regional council, and said, why are we not on your urban orbiter routes? We want the orbiter to go to New Brighton, to go here, there, and everywhere. In other words, the idea of these circular orbiting routes was really so answering what people wanted, that people were telling us that they actually had sold up their place in the country and moved to the city on the understanding that they might be on an orbiter route. So in actual fact, what the previous speaker has said is very apt. You do need to do research, you do need to answer people's needs. But I would say one of the greatest lessons we had is invest in bus services, invest in things, and then the patronage will follow. If you don't do that, you don't get the patronage. And quite frankly, at one stage, there was a declaration that we really need to take all the seats out of buses because only the workers used them. And we had a delegation from Ballantyne saying, if you take the seats out of buses, our patronage in the intercity will drop so much that we actually may have to move out of the inner city. So you really have to recognise that there are many facets to transportation, and I would support what you're proposing to do. Now, to move to my particular submission here, I've actually dealt quite a little bit with transport, and you will see that I've actually put quite a lot on actually investing in the rail network, and because I think it's about time we did this. We know that we have many townships, as we used to call them, certain urban areas outside the Christchurch area, the main Christchurch area, and that people are living there, and that we could have more people living there. And people are commuting from there already, and all the old transport systems that used to connect by rail were very well used. And I think that it's time that we really did something with the heavy rail corridor that has been left and carefully preserved for use. And it is something that people want because they know the expenses of the expense in terms of resources and also in money in private transport. I myself have to go up and visit my sister in Amberley twice a week, and the congestion on the roads, the traffic on the roads is to me quite shocking. I mean, I was brought up in the high country. We travelled that road, admittedly, maybe every 6 months or so, but the difference between then and now is just phenomenal. And the way that the traffic is almost bumper to bumper at certain times of day really indicates that we should be taking a lot of that traffic off the road, and it could be indeed on the rail that exists now. So I'm really pushing for commuter services in terms of both climate change emission opportunities, reduction opportunities, and actually serving social needs as the population goes older, needs store, and population needs housing, and the population needs jobs, which are maybe further afield. We need that kind of transportation linkage. And may I just say, in terms of housing, one only has to look at Europe to see how an efficient rail transportation network allows density of population and rural landscapes. It's quite extraordinary to see the great amount of rural landscape in Europe and small, low-rise cities or towns, all well-serviced by rail and interlinked. And that is the way that you actually manage to house people, I believe, as well as maintain the essential resources of the countryside and its food producing ability. Just like to say that I was making the comment in terms of land and water, or a water and land portfolio, that there's a need to build understanding and acceptance about the health of water and its linkage to the health of the community, and indeed a healthy planet, healthy ecosystems is something that we should all understand, and it's becoming clearer as, of course, we move forward. But to do this, it really needs to be part of our education system, and I really think it's incredibly important that Environment Canterbury is part of that education system, is investing in understanding for the policies it's trying to introduce. And therefore, the investment in environment education and enviro schools, I think, is a very important part of your planning, and why I support option 1, among other things. And that also, option 1 also allows for support for landowners, which is not elsewhere. I do think that's a matter that has been proved in the past and needs to be continued. And that support can sometimes be the very genuine hands-on advice that comes from having people on the ground. In fact, I think that's one of the essential elements. I was somewhat concerned about the implication that the level of nitrate allowable in groundwater will become 2.4 megagrams per litre. I'm not sure if that's quite correct, but it was the figure that was given to me. And I do think that current research is showing that we actually have to keep working at reducing that nitrate and nitrogen level in our drinking water, in our groundwater. We don't know enough about the ecosystem of groundwater. We don't know enough about the actual bacteria, the life that lives within it, and we actually don't know to our peril. And I do think that we actually should be considering the very recent research that's coming out that's showing the limits, the correlation between nitrates and human health, if nothing else. And I say if nothing else because I'm also extraordinarily concerned about the microfauna that we are affecting by these nitrate levels and all the other biota that's in it as well. Now, how much more does that mean I have, Mike? None. Okay, well, I'm open to questions. I've written things down in my submission, which I'm...
So we've got time for just one question. Sorry, Phil.
Well, thank you very much, Dinah, for sharing that, your chapter history too. I just really wanted to ask you, one thing you refer to is that we need frequent, good coverage and reasonable directness. Reasonable directness. So I want to ask you about the coverage part for our transport model with our buses and just how you see that, given that we've had some submitters who said, look, this part of our town, we would like to see some buses. So I just wondered how you see that, especially, say, providing that social need that you referred to.
Well, I do think... Thank you. I do think joining up where people want to go is very, very important. And of course, the system I know of, you actually serve some of these suburbs with the slow crawlers that are not so frequent, but actually give access to older people or people with disabilities who are not necessarily the commuters going to work or to education. If you have that sort of coverage, less frequent, but still servicing those suburban areas, and then you have the commuter corridors, I think you're able to achieve a coverage in the sense it's meant. And you actually need the outliers.
No, we're stopping now, sorry. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Diana. You can carry on that conversation over smoko or something. But thank you, Diana, for coming in. We're now going to Timaru. Judith, are you all set to go?
Yes, Councillor Lindsay just stepped out, so she won't be far away. There we go.
Right, we'll just start the camera. We're all
Okay. Are you ready to go, Judith? Are you?
The first submitter is Mr. Rooney. Yes, come and sit up here. Sorry, these are the microphones. The camera will be starting.
Can we have a camera on, Judith, so we can see you? Oh, yeah.
Yes, I'm just working on that. It is saying it's working, so I will persevere.
Thank you for you guys from Timaru for tuning in to the submission process. We can see you now loud and clear. We're all good, Judith. 10 minutes, and then we'll start ringing bells.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and everybody else that's present. My name is Gary Rooney. I'm the Managing Director of Rooney Farms, Rooney Group, Rooney Earth Moving and Rooney Holdings. I'm also a private landowner in the Canterbury region and the chair of the combined Waihoa-Wainono Combined Rating District. I'm making this presentation on behalf of all of these entities. Submissions arising from the Waihoa-Wainono Combined Rating District, individual ratepayers, the Rating District Committee and the community have not been provided with any relevant infrastructure assessment information or financial projections. It is my submission that because of the lack of information, the Council has not discharged its duties, including consultation, to enable it to level the rates required to fund these proposals. The proposed expenditures total $850,000 in the next 10 years and $13.8 million in the next 11 to 30 years. To put that in perspective, the total demand on our ratepayers is something like $85,000 a year plus external contributions. I submit that in the absence of the necessary information that the proposed works programs are unjustified and unnecessary, including but not limited to the proposal to engage an external consultant to undertake further works. To enable a prudent assessment and justification for future works programs in this rating district, ECAN needs to correlate all background data and information arising from the existing system. In the absence of this information, a fair and reasonable assessment of the existing system or future works program is unable to be made. To submit that in the absence of any information to the contrary, the system is currently working perfectly and does not require any further works to be undertaken. In summary, section 4.5 of the proposed LTP states that the performance standards of the infrastructure are set in consultation with rating district committees and formalised within each scheme's asset management plan. Since purchasing the property in this rating district, I have actually participated as either a ratepayer, a committee member or chairman. I do not recall ever being consulted on acceptable performance standards or the contents of the asset management plan. At best, we are presented a fait accompli. I submit that ECAN provide the committee and ratepayers with a copy of the proposed draft asset management plan and proposed performance standards for consultation in accordance with the provisions of the LTP. Decisions sought. On behalf of the submitters I represent, we seek the following decisions. 1, that the proposed works are removed from the draft LTP. 2, that the information available to support the proposed works and expenditure is insufficient for ECAN statutory obligations to be discharged. 3, that the necessary investigations are carried out in the next financial year to better determine the future needs and requirements of this catchment. 4, that the committee is engaged with over the next financial year to determine what levels of service are acceptable to the community it represents. 5, that prior to engaging any expert, ECAN is required to undertake the necessary information gathering and consultation with the community to justify such engagement. Detail rates information. ECAN has not provided adequate details to support a greater than 16% increase in rates for all ratepayers contributing to this rating district. Decisions sought. 1, that the proposed more than 16% increase to the target differential rate catchment works rate A is unjustified. B, requires further work to be undertaken to produce the necessary level of information to the community to justify the proposed significant increase. Proposed annual spend. I was appalled to read that ECAN proposes to spend $20,000 more than the total annual rate take for this financial year in the absence of consultation with the community. The committee and prudent financial planning based on sound infrastructure management planning and review. On behalf of the committee and the rating district, I can confirm that we are satisfied with the current level of service and do not support the proposed 2021-22 work programme. It is our submission that ECAN will not be discharging its obligations and responsibilities to ratepayers if it continues with this work programme without first justifying it to the rating district and all the contributors in a prudent and professional manner and assessing the feedback in accordance with its obligations. To put that in perspective, at the moment we're spending something like $85,000 a year, which is roughly about half of our total income from rates. And we've been doing that now for a number of years. And the reason for that was 1, was to get us out of debt, and 2, to build up a war chest for future issues that may arise within our watershed. So to turn around and now to spend that money when everybody agrees that our rating district is in very good heart is beyond comprehension. Decisions sought that the proposed 21-22 work program for this rating district be put on hold until ECAN has undertaken the necessary work to prepare and justify its proposals, that the proposed 21-22 works program does not go ahead unless the democratic process at the next committee meeting is followed and is in favour of progressing the same. Discharge of local government responsibilities and obligations. It is our understanding that ECAN has specific responsibilities and obligations to ratepayers when developing and implementing its LTP and its decisions to level, spend and borrow funds for projects. Those in summary include 1. Consultation, 2. Identifying all reasonable practical options, 3. Assessing the pros and cons of a proposal, 4. If a significant decision involves land or water, consideration of iwi values, 5. Open transparency and democratic decision making, 6. Be aware of and have regard to views of all communities, 7. To undertake commercial transactions in accordance with sound business practice. 8. Ensure prudent stewardship and the efficient and effective use of resources. And 9. Ensure prudent financial management that promotes the interests of the entire community. It is our submission that ECAN has failed to discharge its responsibilities and obligations in relation to the proposal contained in the LTP, which relate to the Waihoa-Wainono Combined Rating District. In particular, no consideration has been given or communication about these considerations provided to the ratepayers these decisions directly impact, including the community outcomes to which each of the proposed activities affect, the distribution of benefits between the community as a whole or any identifiable part of the community and any individuals, the extent to which the actions or inactions of particular individuals or a group contributes to the need to undertake the activity, the costs and benefits, including consequences for transparency and accountability of funding the activity distinctly from other activities, and the overall impact of any allocation of liability for revenue needs on the current and future social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of the community. Decisions sought. 1. That the proposed activities in the LTP, which relate to the Waihoa-Wainono Combined Rating District, be deleted from the LTP until genuine consultation has occurred. That ECAN can provide the committee and the ratepayers with the necessary information about each of the proposals in a way and in such detail which is proportionate to the significance of the proposed spend. That ECAN in future annual and long-term plans consistent with democratic process only includes proposed activities which the affected ratepayers and committee democratically support. That the limited information provided in the draft LTP does not, or on its own, meet the threshold to A, constitute consultation, B, enable open, transparent or democratic decision making, or C, amount to prudent financial management, or D, ensure prudent stewardship, or E, be an example of sound business practice. Proposed activities. It is our submission that the significant activities proposed in the annual work program and included in the draft LTP be placed on hold until sufficient information is provided to ratepayers. It is further submitted that the Waihoa-Wainono Combined Rating District is not being managed for all purposes that rates are collected for and therefore amounts to mismanagement. Currently, no consideration to environment or recreational benefits is given to lagoon management in this part of the region. However, rates are collected for this purpose. Currently, land drainage is the only consideration that is given any weight or consideration. Decision sought. 1. That there is insufficient information to include and increase rates for the proposed activities identified in the LTP and current annual plan program. That the management of the combined rating district requires independent review an investigation to ensure that it is being managed consistently with all the purposes rates are levied for, in particular, recreational wetland enhancement and fish passage. Ongoing management and proposal development, it is our understanding that we are making a decision to levy, collect and spend rates. Council must appropriately weigh various considerations, including the effects on and opinions of ratepayers, including not disproportionately placing weight on the needs and wants of a few against the many. It is submitted that the management decision to date in relation to proposed activities included in the LTP and on the ground decisions in this part of the region have been disproportionately made in favour of the minority of affected ratepayers to the disadvantage of the wider community. In contrary to the submissions and communications of the most directly affected and majority of ratepayers. Decisions sought that going forward, all proposals and decisions must give appropriate weight to the submissions and communications of ratepayers that is not disproportionate to the contribution of the total rating pool and purposes for which rates are collected for. 2. Submissions proposed overall regional rates increase. Total revenue increases of 24.5% in 2021-22 and 9% in 22-23. While it is generally accepted that costs have increased along with workload since the last LTP, it is inconceivable that they have or will increase by such a significant margin. It is submitted that if the level of information provided to date to justify projects in the above rating district are representative of the level of information that sits behind the overall region-wide proposed increases, that there is insufficient information to enable Council to transparently and prudently allow either option 1 or option 2. Decisions sought that such substantial increases are deferred until Council can be satisfied that it will discharge its obligations to the community, that better and further information in each area of proposed substantial increases is provided to the community to discharge Council's obligations prior to either option 1 or option 2 being proposed in the future, and that they be agreed to by the community. Submissions, rates and charges policy. Land use application gravel. The increase in fixed charges for land use, excavation gravel from the bed of a lake or river resource consent applications are between $2,500 and $4,700 is unjustified, particularly in South Canterbury. In South Canterbury, the industry...
Gary, can I just interrupt? You're putting your papers on top of the mic and it's just making me...
Apologies for that. In South Canterbury, the gravel industry has entered into, and it's been operating for a long time, an MOU agreement with ECAN. It includes reaching agreement on processing times and agreement with all potentially affected parties in relation to appropriate consent conditions to mitigate potential effects arising from non-compliance with current permitted activity rules. Typically, all applications are non-notified or limited notification because of these agreements, including maximum durations and annual volumes. The agreed best endeavour 10-day processing time under the relevant industry MOU with Environment Canterbury further demonstrates and supports the straightforwardness nature of these applications. Therefore, we are submitting that because this is so simple, these values, these consent costs are far too high. The decision sought that the proposed fixed fee for these applications be revised and reduced to better reflect the actual time that should be spent processing these applications. Fixed charges. The policy has not disclosed how the fixed fees or deposits have been developed to demonstrate how the fee is allocated between resources, including allocated administration time. It is submitted that without this information, The proposal lacks transparency or enough information to enable a reasonable assessment of how the fixed fee has been developed. The decision sought that any proposed changes to fixed fees or deposits be deferred until next annual plan and disclosure of how the fixed fee or deposit is allocated between different resources and how that is allocated between different resources has been provided to the community. Permitted activity monitoring. The policy is unclear in relation to whether fees will be charged for monitoring permitted activities where compliance is achieved. It is submitted that no fees should be charged for the permitted activities monitoring where compliance is achieved to avoid disincentivising the potential for corruption or personal opinions influencing monitoring trends. Decision sought that the policy is amended to precisely describe Council's obligations prior to levying charges from the community. That clarification be provided where the fees will be levied for permitted activity monitoring where the compliance is achieved. Thank you. That's the end of my submission.
Thanks, Gary. Perfect timing. We just rang the bell. Questions? Yeah. So it's just there are no questions. Just a question. It was just a clarification that was both your submissions, which it was. So thank you, Gary, for presenting. Your points have been well made and noted. And now ask Tom Hurst to come forward, please. Thanks, Tom. This is submission 631. 10 minutes, Tom.
Thank you. It is with shock that the announcement of 24.5% rate increase proposed by the Regional Council. It is not that the rate increase is a one-off, but this increase will be added to by a further 25% over the next few years. The reason for the increase is to implement the government's freshwater plan. No account has been given to all the work that has been done in recent times by catchment groups. So this new proposal will be a repeat of that work already done. I liken it to like building a shed on a farm. Partway through the build, someone comes along and say it's slightly out of alignment, but you'll have to start again. Anyone with any sense would say that it's not material, with a small change and adjustment that can be worked around. I would have thought, I'll start again. There seems to be a view that ratepayers have an endless ability to pay. There should be more balanced approach. Increasing the UAC is an obvious step. A $60 UAF should be the minimum. It is not the Regional Council's job to take on educational projects. The argument that the chair of the Regional Council put up, that the rate increase is only a small amount in the total scheme of things, is not valid. Anyone in business knows that projects have to be justified and budgets met and costs controlled. I'd just like to make another few comments. The freshwater proposal, no account is given to modern farming practices, particularly to direct drilling. I would be interested in the number of councillors who know what direct drilling is. On our farm at Makiki, we have 4 different soil types, 4 different aspects as far as topography is concerned, and yet there's a blanket requirement that prescribed by Wellington, taken in no account all these factors. Fine work has been done by the catchment group, and you should build on that. All these changes are coming to us like a tsunami. This has the real possibility to break the spirit of the farming community. If all these changes are implemented, at the speed it is proposed, government, national and regional, will be ruling over a regional community with its economic and social spirit broken. Farmers will go along with sensible environmental programs. I suspect that 90% of the proposed rate increase will go towards extra staff in their salaries. The term rates is a misnomer. It is a property tax, and as it is called in America, it is based on valuations. It is not based on net worth. Most taxes had a fairness about them. Income tax, the more you earn, the more you pay. Same with consumer taxes like GST, excise duty and fuel tax. Not so with rates. That concludes my submission.
Thank you, Tom. I have a question from Nicole Marshall, Councillor Nicole Marshall.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for coming into Timaru to give us your submission. I just have a question about building on the work of the catchments groups. How would you like to see us build on the work that's already been done and try and lessen the burden of essential fresh water? What would you like to see?
Well, it's pretty obvious what you do. You take into account the work that has been done and you incorporate that in the new plans that you're proposing. And obviously, there's a whole lot of savings can be made by doing that. So I think that's the first obvious thing to do. Go and talk to those groups that have been established. And I see reports all over the region where these groups are operating. And by and large, they get a community buy-in, and some of them have been going for quite some time, and there's some magnificent work being done. So just build on that.
Thanks, Tom. There are no further questions, so thank you very much for your presentation, Tom. Your points were well made, and they'll be considered. Now call Pamela Russell to come forward. Thanks, Pamela. Just whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, everybody. The question is for Timaru: should we consider investing in My Way by Metro, Timaru's on-demand public transport service, after the trial period is completed? I do use My Way, and I was on the pilot program. I'd like My Way to continue and to expand in the future to include our immediate region and transport to other places such as Waimate, Geraldine, Pleasant Point, Tekapo, for example. It is important to get cars off the road and still offer opportunity for citizens to travel within the region. If the service was available, the demand may well increase, and I don't think at this point it's been assessed. I also majorly support the use of the smaller vehicles to continue as per the My Way initiative. It's far more environmentally friendly, though I do see a number of them travelling around with maybe one person in them. I know COVID has made a difference to perhaps social distancing and that sort of thing, but I'm not too sure in relation to cost effectiveness of the big buses with no one in them or the small buses with no one in them. I would find it much more convenient to have fixed routes and a fixed timetable rather than ringing the call centre or using the app as is currently in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. We have a question from Nicole.
I think I'm asking it on behalf of myself and John. I'm confused that you want fixed routes and timetabling, but you also want My Way. To me, those are contrary. I'm just like, if you could explore that a wee bit more for me, please.
I think it's basically about the public transport service. Previously, we did have a linked service and other services. My Way, I really haven't made the distinction that My Way means just ringing up, or more like an Uber service. I'm really I really can't answer that question. I don't have the knowledge on it. Sorry, I'm just putting forward what I think would be useful.
No, thank you, Pamela. No, and that's exactly why you're making your submission. So don't apologise. Do we have any other questions? No, thank you, Pamela, for your submission. And if we could ask Peter Shutt to come forward. This is submission 296. Just whenever you're ready, Peter.
Well, good afternoon, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for giving up your golf, gardening or fishing to hear this submission. I appreciate it. I'm familiar with the system of United Nations relationship with government and regional councils and district councils, so I can understand where you're coming from with an awful lot of the information in your long-term plan. But if you look back along the lines, there are plenty of opportunities to surmise that some of the people giving you the instructions don't really know what the answers ought to be anyway. So it's a complex situation that you're in. And when I go back to the days of Kerry Burke, Mark Oldfield, Dr. Brian Jenkins and Commissioner Tom Lambie and David Cagle, then quite frankly, I think there's still a long way to go. But first, let me tell you why I was moved to present a submission. Upon reading the long-term plan, I considered the council might perhaps have looked more deeply into the benefits of my way in Timaru. Einstein said we cannot solve problems with the same level of thinking that created them. So I would just point out that dollars and cents and patronage are just parts of the wider equation, but that's what I see you thinking of in the main. My submission illustrates why my way should be looked at in the wider context of community service, issues pertaining to public safety, issues pertaining to climate change, and issues pertaining to marketing and advertising. I'm delighted to see that the Timaru District Plan has a big advertisement on the back of one of your vehicles. I did not see anything about the ECAN long-term plan there. I was disappointed. I've deliberately mentioned electric vehicles and issues pertaining to their true cost. And if you look at this week's threat of upcoming power blackouts and climate change issues, it simply emphasises that charging electric vehicles could remain a problem for some time. If you are familiar with the Lake Onslow proposal, you will recognise how costly and how inefficient it could well be, because government says it's only intended for use once per 10 years. Yet we're now talking about blackouts. And if it does go ahead, it's going to take years to become operational anyway. So in the meantime, I'd like you to seriously consider hybrid vehicles that recharge while driving until the serious alternative is available. It doesn't solve the battery issue, but it does solve the electrical grid recharge problems. It doesn't completely solve the fossil fuel situation, but it reduces the use of fossil fuel and is a good reduction in carbon emission. It's a practical option at this time. How can this winter's predicted blackouts, changing climate, rainfall and storms, and increased drought predictions from the weather experts equate to any real reliability of electricity from the national grid? The matter needs careful consideration of the wider issues associated with vehicles, such as the reduction of fossil fuel use, reduced traffic on the roads. You saw that during the lockdown period. Reduced traffic, less accidents, and a lot less fossil fuel use. Reduced accidents, reduced trauma at hospitals, and improving community services simultaneously can't all be bad. You know that the My Way system is being watched carefully by other councils. I would like to think that ECAN has the strength of knowledge and ability to see the big picture and give My Way the thumbs up it deserves. With the proposed changes to regional local councils, your decision and implementation demands a quick decision, in my view. And I think you should remember that nothing happens unless you make it happen. And in fact, I'd go so far to say that you are the implementation team. And that's a modern word. implementation, apparently. Einstein said, "The framing of a problem is often far more essential than the solution." And that's why I go back to say, hey, look at the big picture, please. So I'm asking you to address my way with common sense and integrity. Good luck, and thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Peter. And I think it's fair to say that the submission process is to gauge the opinion of people of Timaru for the benefit of the benefits of My Way, and if they support it in the submission process, then I think the Regional Council will support My Way. So,
thank you.
Do we have any questions? No, I think you've stunned us all into silence. So thank you very much for your submission, Peter. And
thank you.
Now ask Phil Driver to come forward. Thanks, Phil. Submission 224.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to ECAN's long-term plan. I'll assume you've read my written submission, so I won't repeat that. In the next few minutes, I'll introduce myself. I'll summarise key issues relating to water management and climate change, which are two issues that are key to me, and I'll recommend some actions. So my background, I'm a dad and a granddad, currently developing a permaculture food forest just outside Timaru. I've got a scientific background in sustainable management, an extensive professional international experience facilitating large-scale community strategies on topics like environmental management, the Overseer software package, geospatial technologies for agriculture, renewable energy, health, primary sector strategies, and the well-being of children. When I was at Lincoln in the 1990s, my staff developed the Aquaflex soil moisture system, and my colleagues researched and published on nitrate pollution from dairy intensification and modelled Canterbury's groundwater systems. I'm currently Deputy Chair of the OTOP Zone Committee, member of the Pariora Catchment Society Incorporated and the Catchment Collective South Canterbury Incorporated Society, but this submission is on my own behalf. In 2008 and 9, I led the stakeholder engagement for the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, and I distilled the key CWMS principles and the first and second order priorities. The CWMS has been repeatedly endorsed by all Canterbury councils. But now a consistent message I hear from many of South Canterbury's 65,000 citizens is, we want our rivers back. So what's happened since the launch of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy? What has been the biggest change to water management in Canterbury in the last 10 years? It's a doubling of cow urine, faeces and methane and artificial fertilisers pumped into our environment. That's been the biggest change to water management in Canterbury in the last 10 years. That went ahead with minimal consultation or collaboration with Canterbury's communities, despite farmer organisations saying in 2009 that they would consult and collaborate with their communities. So I repeat, this doubling of pollution was done with minimal consultation or collaboration with Canterbury's communities, while the farming sector absolutely knew at the time that their actions would cause huge environmental damage. It was widely published at the time. This intensification has led to increased pollution of more and more drinking water bores, pollution of surface water and consequent increases in highly toxic formidium blooms, continued loss of many opportunities for mahinga kai, continued loss of even more wetlands, 75% of our freshwater fish threatened or at risk of extinction, hugely increased contributions to greenhouse gases. And this next point is crucial. There's been a loss of trust in the farming sector by large sections of Canterbury communities because of these changes, while also noting that just a small percentage of farmers are causing most of the damage and this loss of trust. There's some superb farmers out there, superb work by catchment groups, and it's being offset by the continuing very, very large-scale damage. I'm not okay with that list of 10 years of failures to implement the first order priorities of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. The CWMS started with such promise, but every first order priority has gone backwards in the last 10 years, every one of them. These failures have led to central government's necessary intervention with more rigorous freshwater protection policies. So what can ECAN do now? Firstly, introduce rigorous rules for driving the first order priorities of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. So the first order priorities actually improve. Don't just stop going backwards, they've got to move forward. Secondly, seriously enforce those rules. Many farmers tell me that they're frustrated that too many of their peers are breaching resource consents and polluting the environment and getting away with it. Many of the farmers I know want stricter enforcement of the rules. Please do it. Can we please take a higher level approach to the zone committees? Can we insist that the committees focus on the big issues, such as the profound impacts of climate change on water management, especially for South Canterbury's flashy rivers? And I've written a paper on that called Slow Water. I'm happy to share that. Can you please only appoint members to the committees who are skilled and are already well informed and enthusiastically committed to their roles on the zone committees so they all contribute? And finally, my generation has arguably been the luckiest to ever walk on this planet. Our ancestors fought wars for us, established infrastructure for us, developed education and health systems for us, and looked after the environment far better than my generation has. They gifted this all to us for our benefit. Are we going to continue their legacy and create healthy environments for our children and grandchildren? Or are we going to continue to destroy their future by failing to accept responsibility and pay the costs of our damaging behaviour over the last 50 years? Will history label us the selfish generation? So for every issue ECAN faces, imagine yourself in 20 to 30 years being asked this question by your grandchildren's generation. Grandad, in 2021, you categorically knew about the expected devastating impacts on future generations of climate change and poor water management. So what did you personally do to protect our futures? Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. We have a bevy of questions starting, and I'll start with you, Megan, then Phil, then Lan.
Thanks for your submission, Phil. I've just noted in your written submission you referred to the annual general charge and said that you would be happy to increase it to fund restoration of the environment. Can we take from that that you would be happy for us to move biodiversity improvements or Merurako or any of those projects into a uniform charge?
I don't care which charge it comes from, but I personally would be happy for my ECAN rates to be doubled if that funding is spent on restoration of our environment, a healthy environment.
Thanks, Phil. Grant.
Mr. Chair, just wondering if we could ask for the additional text and the submission to be circulated to members.
Yeah, Judith, can you arrange that? Click the Lan.
Yeah, thanks for your submission, Phil. My question was just about the comment you made about asking for a high level approach in the zone committees. And you also mentioned the superb catchment group work which has been going on in your area, which I know you've been involved in. I wonder if you could offer some comments about expanding on the high level approach with climate change issues and that kind of thing, but then how it might feed into those catchment groups, if you've got any thoughts there.
Yes, thanks, Lan. I've got two perspectives on catchment groups. At the end of the day, it's people out there in the real world that have to make the change. And so the catchment groups, particularly farmers, have to be the people that do the work. I think that's, there's no two ways around it. However, if we look at South Canterbury, there's 65,000 citizens and there's just 311 dairy herds. And so if we're going to have catchment groups driving the changes, they have to be accountable to all 65,000 citizens of this area. Now, that doesn't mean that we just dump all the responsibility onto the catchment groups. The catchment groups have to be supported. And I know many people in the Timaru area would love to get out and help with riparian planting, with fencing. They volunteer to do it. We had a tree planting day in Timaru last year, and they ran out of trees in 15 minutes. There were so many volunteers wanting to help. So I think the catchment groups have a leading role to play. The ones I'm involved in are probably 95% farmers. And that to me is a major problem. We have to get far more representation of other players into those catchment groups. So in the meantime, a key role of the zone committees is to be far more representative of the wider community. So we need zone committees that have, I would say, 80% at least of the wider population as members of those committees. In terms of tackling the major changes, we've got huge challenges down here with an increased flashiness of our rivers. And we need to look at, well, how do we fix that? And a key message is to replant the upper catchment, and that will have benefit after benefit after benefit. Another major factor we're going to have to face with climate change is climate refugees. Currently, the world is on track for most of Australia to be uninhabitable by 2050. So where are 20 million Australians going to go? They're not going to go to Indonesia or north, because that's worse. So there's potential for an enormous influx of people within, hopefully, my lifetime. I'll be pushing 100 by then, but certainly within the lifetime of my children, and that will have massive impacts on climate adaptation and water management. So I think roles of zone committees, we need very competent, capable, forward-thinking people on those committees, exploring these bigger pictures and making suggestions to ECAN and the other councils, rather than just saving the odd mudfish here and there, which is essential to do. But I would strongly recommend we look at those big pictures that are going to affect our children and grandchildren's lifetimes.
Thanks, Phil. And I know the Australian government's already started sending people over here. Phil, you had a question?
Correct. Hi, Phil, and thank you very much for your presentation. But I just wanted to ask you about your comment in connection with increasing the areas of targeted rates. And I'm just wondering, do you mean widening the areas where some people or more people might benefit? Just wondering how you might do that.
I'd be fair to say I'm not sufficiently familiar with the concept of targeted rates versus general rates, and I apologise for that. My view is I'll leave it up to the councillors to decide what source the funding comes from, whether it's targeted or general. I don't have a view on that.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. Look, thank you for presenting a submission. Thank you, Judith, for organising your South Canterbury constituents to come to the South Timaru office. That's been a really good session. Thank you very much. We'll call the session to a finish now, and I propose to try to keep up with the fact we're ahead of time. We will start at 25 past. That still gives us half an hour for smoker, and we'll crack into it again. Thank you. We'll call the session back into to order, or whatever the word is, and welcome. Do we need the secretary?
We do need the secretary.
In which case, I'll do the introductions, which is Nicky Anderson and her husband Duncan, who are from Rotherham. Got it right this time. She can.
Oh, she is.
Here we are.
It's okay.
That's right, Louise.
Just doing the intro, Louise. Very good.
All set? Good. Over to you, Nicky.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you, councillors, for having us here today. As Mr. Chair said, I'm Nicky and this is Duncan Anderson. We're We farm dairy and beef at Rotherham, which is in the Emery Basin. Culverden's the main service centre there, so you guys get your bearings. Just for a bit of context, we produce 2 bottles of milk for every New Zealander every year, and as well as prime marbled Wagyu, which is mostly for export, and enough beef to feed every second New Zealander a really decent beef patty a year. Our farming business supports 4 families, quite big families. One of them's a family with 7 children in it, and 4 individual workers on the farm. We're all active in our small community and do all the things that small community people do, you know, boards of trustees, sporting leaders, keeping the well-being of the community up there. We have 2 sons in their 20s who are also both working for food producers, sheep and beef. So there are 2 main points we want to get across today so that we don't confuse things completely. The first is regarding the options and the second is regarding the UAGCs. So we believe that option 1 is simply unaffordable fiscally, but also reputationally for you as a council. Your own long-term plan states that council has weighed up the desire to move with urgency on the activity outlined in option 1, with the need to ensure that affordability is considered. We think your long-term plan actually demonstrates a lack of understanding of the cost to individual property owners, particularly those in rural districts. To quote the phrase, going hard and going early, we don't think you can do that with ratepayers' money, especially given the nature and the volume of and the change around the regulation that's coming down from central government. So our message is concentrate on the must-dos and get the people right, get the right people on board. And we believe a rush job's never a good job. It takes time to get good people who are going to move towards the goals that you've actually identified, one step at a time and in the right direction. And it is all about relationships. I think there's been a bit of a waxing and waning of relationships along the CWMS journey with landowners. So the risk of losing the remaining goodwill is actually a really high risk, we believe. So secondly, we believe that the uniform annual general charges are set at an insultingly low level. 7% this year in your draft plan. It was 8% or 8.4, I think, last year, when a maximum of 30% is actually allowed. Another thing your LTP states is that option 1 responds to increasing government and community expectation of action. When it comes to land and water, all humans contribute to the degradation that we're seeing, whether it's through substandard wastewater in our cities, consumption choices, transportation choices, the multiple footprints we all leave on this planet. And it's humans who are benefiting from us putting it right. So we all need to contribute to that cost. And we need to do it in a fair way. We don't believe that 7% of UAGCs, 7% of the general rate in UAGCs is fair at all. Just to try and put it in context for you, the land that we look after and pay rates on holds consents. So we've paid for these and we continue to pay for the administration of them and to maintain the conditions that are placed on those consents. And you're all aware of the things that need to be done, telemetry and monitoring and backflow prevention, all those things. These are costs of doing business, no argument there. We are members of the Emery Irrigation Company's Environmental Collective. So part of our water rate, goes towards funding our audited farm environment plans, which we incidentally hold an A grade on, and we're proud of that. And a lot is spent on continuing to maintain that A grade. So as technology advances, you keep making the improvements to lessen the outcomes on the land or improve the environmental outcomes. So this collective also collects a charge to improve catchment-wide outcomes, which costs us as a farm $9,000 a year. And that's things like planting wetlands, looking at bioreactors, its own monitoring, that sort of thing. And again, we believe this is a cost of doing business, fair call. But ironically, the better we look after the land, the more our land is valued and the higher rates we get to pay. So it doesn't seem fair to us. So I don't know that you would think that's fair, to be distributing the cost of human habitation proportionally against land values. We don't think so. And we'd like your council to consider increasing the uniform annual general charge to the maximum 30%. So in summary, we're only given 2 options under the draft. Both of them are unaffordable given the current rating structure. If we're to choose, our say is option 2 and address the disparity of obscenely low uniform annual general charges and find ways to do things smarter, one step at a time in the right direction and with the right people.
Thanks, Nicky. Do we have questions? Claire?
Thank you. Thanks, Nicky, and thank you, Duncan, for coming along to support us. That's great. Listen, we've heard you just talk about the lack of understanding and affordability around the council table, or you're feeling that that's what you've picked up, and also the very important context around relationships and the risk of losing the remaining goodwill, and that's very real. You've just mentioned the fact that if you had a choice of the 2 options, you would go for option 2. If you had another choice of the 3rd option, which was the other option, what do you think that percentage increase, what sort of percentage increase do you think would be acceptable to you that we could then work within a framework of a work program to meteorise?
I've just realised I forgot to turn that on. Sorry about that. It's really difficult because, I know you guys have got a huge amount of work coming your way. So, yeah, I don't know what's acceptable. And, for us, our council, Haranui District Council, is scared about going out with 8.7%. That was hard for us to go out with that amount. I think 10 is any amount. I really do. And I suppose to back that up, if I'm allowed to, we all know that good people are hard to find, and from memory, I think it was 70 or 77 full-time equivalents you'd be looking for to fulfil your option 1. Well, everybody's looking for good people, and nobody can find them now. So from day 1, 1st of July this year, I don't think you could spend that amount of money that you put in that forecast, because I don't think you'd be able to attract the right people to do those roles, because you're in competition with so many other organisations.
Thanks, Nicky. Vicky, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the UAGC. So at the moment, our land and water portfolio is almost exclusively paid for with general rates, of which about 52% comes from Christchurch residents already. And pest control work, again, where there's a targeted rate, is matched 50% with general rate, which again, 52% of that comes from Christchurch residents. And then there's also additional coming from Christchurch businesses as well. And obviously you've got other urban residential and business across places like Timaru and so on. So I'm just wondering, in terms of UAGC, which is about spending from predominantly those lower value properties in often urban areas, contributing yet further to the spending, what specific things do you think the UAGC should be paying for that is currently within general rates but would be pushed to spreading to the lower value properties?
So just to be clear, did you just say that 52% of the general rate is paid for by the city folk and businesses.
That's Christchurch residents. 52% comes from Christchurch residents, and then there's additional funding coming from Christchurch businesses, probably taking to around about 60% of the general rate.
Hang on. Sorry, the chairman's going to intervene. 52% of the general rate in total comes from Christchurch City.
I'm astounded. I don't think that's nearly enough. How many people is that?
The point being where the money is being spent.
Hang on. We're not debating. No. You asked a question.
I hear you. Your question was, where do I think rate should come from, or what portfolios? Land and water. We're humans. That's what I said. Land and water. We all need to pay for that. And as you said in your draft document, it's government and communities are asking for our land and our water to be cleaned up. I mean, we all know what sort of rubbish is floating down our city rivers. We know that our city sewage systems are completely outdated. I mean, if you knew I can tell you what we spent on our own effluent disposal on our farm. It was about $200,000 to put it in. So that's just for cows. So there's 1,700 cows on our farm. I don't know how many people there are in the city, but I know that for our district council, when we were doing our disposal for our one of our rural towns, I think we spent $1 million for maybe 400 people. So, when you put that in context, it's I think there's not enough emphasis placed on the cities and how the cities need to clean up their act. So
okay.
Great.
Vicky, we're not debating, please. Thank you, Nicky and Duncan, for your presentation. There are no further questions. I'll ask, thank you very much for coming all the way down from Rotherham. I'll ask Mark Saunders to come forward. Mark's submission has been circulated around for everybody to see. Just remind councillors that questions are for clarification, and they are questions. And if you push the button,
Good afternoon, everybody. My submission 691. Yeah, I didn't have a scheduled invite to come. I ran this morning and you've managed to find time in your day, and happened to be in Christchurch, so got my ideas together. Good to be here. Thank you. So I'm a farming father, and 691. Thank you. So my wife and I farm in the Hines district, Lagmore community, south of Ashburton. We have 3 sons which we managed to create in Canterbury. We're not natives of Canterbury, but they have one red and one black eye, and they love this place like no other. We're heavily engaged in everything from the mountains to the sea. We really are. We fish, we hunt, we farm, we care for animals. We run away from Dad and hide in the creek and find the mudfish and the trout and the tuna and put the eels back, boy, is what we do on our land. And we came to Lagmore in early 2000s, and there wasn't the state of development that there is today. the groundwater resource has changed, and we're a red zone, quite rightly, with where the aquifers sit to this point in time, and are aware that intensive farming has a balancing act to play, and I've been leading in local circles and working hard to put our best foot forward and do the absolute for what we can for our community and our farming practices to take things forward. So I've been heavily involved in our district since Mr. Cagle and others came down and wherever we were, created baselines, 2010, 2011, thereabouts. And it's incredibly disheartening to put hundreds of hours of work into our community, get involved with plantings, invite strangers, people onto our farm, do stuff, educate school kids, and invest in best practices and actually hold people to account on our farm. Good farming is what happens in environmental measures, is what happens when no one's looking. So you can come on a Sunday and it'll be the same as it was on Tuesday, type things. Instilling good practices is a massive amount of work and something I hold passionately in what we do. We've achieved an A audit again just recently with what happens on farm. So part of the journey for us in our district was getting involved with supporting the Managed Aquifer Recharge project, and it looks to be an absolute winner with the science that we've created. We've battled crazy rules in our community where it was seen as a discharge, to, like wastewater type idea, and we've done things safely and in terms of following process. And yeah, I find it quite odd that it pops up in this long-term plan as something potentially that naysayers could throw down on, when it's a fantastic opportunity to come in with what's happening on farms and better practices and reductions on what's happening inside the farm gate to aid the water quality and potentially the water quantity of our district. It's vital that we can use some technology and some science to restore the lowland streams and the fauna and keep those streams wet, I suppose you'd say, and to keep the things from mudfish and your natives running properly. So I was, when it appears that, if you don't support it in the plan, it's not going to happen. My goodness, I'm here to tell you it's just common sense that it must go ahead, it must be supported. And some great people inside ECAN, been Brett Painter and others have been part of that journey with us in our community. So that's primarily my purpose for being here today. Secondary to that, going with that, I don't wish to pass judgment or comment on what Timaru people do with a metro bus system. That's not for me as a resident of Hinds who drives to Timaru now and then or goes through it to be part of it all. And so neither do I feel that others miles away in the other parts of the catchment should be playing God, or whatever you want to call it, around what happens with us in the Hinds in terms of if it's a supported regional catchment project and those landholders in the catchment contribute to that in a financial way, then that's the right model in my belief. So I'm my family not in this region, but we've been farming in different forms going back to 1904 that I can work out. My three sons, our three sons, Penny and I, raised the love of the land and are looking like they're not anti-farming at this point in time. They can do whatever they wish, but we have a generational care of land in our family, and I would see it as an economic model coming together for them to have an opportunity in the future. It means that we can't regulate our way, shrinking our way from greatness. The Ashburton district is a thriving community. It doesn't want to just survive with draconian ideas. And relitigating regional plans is not a way forward that I can see fit. When when we've done all this great collaborative work, including engaging with Arawhenua and all stakeholders in our community, to have to relitigate things with another round of, it's just a whole lot of energy that people don't need to go down. There's other things to focus on. Get on with it. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for coming up and sharing your passion for farming with us. I see in your original submission that you think 10% is about what we should be at in terms of rate rise. So there's a number of things that we've got there that we need to drop out. Have you got a sense of that?
I guess so.
And your button, Mark, please.
Where I was coming from was there's some things that in the plan that look a little touchy-feely or hard to measure, and in terms of sort of some social things there, people well-being and so forth, and we have great state support in this country. I don't know whether that's the regional council's role to be in those spaces. Equally, you better have a damn good business case for the metro bus idea and down in Timaru, because it doesn't, from the outside it looks a bit like a bit of a gift horse just to say, well, we'll whack some buses out there and magically carbon's going to come down or something. Like, those are funny, fuzzy sort of things which are need a business case behind them to stack up, or we're just blowing everybody's good money away. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Any further questions? Haven't missed anybody. Look, so your points are well made. Thanks, Mark. And we'll consider them as a council. So thank you for making time in your busy schedule to come in and present. And thank you for that. Do we have our next? Thanks, Mark. So David Perenara, would you like to come and present on behalf of Colin Meurk? Yeah, I know. So people, this is Peter Lowe, who is scheduled for, whose submission is 1270 and 1006. Since Peter's here, we'll crack on with Peter's submission, if that's okay with everybody. Peter, you've got two submissions. You one on behalf of Mid-Canterbury Independent Irrigators and one on your own, is it? HH Wet, three. Okay, cool. So Peter is chairman of the HH Wet Trust, the Heinz Hekio Water Enhancement Trust, which is running the Maha project. Are you chair of the Mid-Canterbury Independent Irrigators? Right, cool. So when you're ready, Peter, and you just push the button on the speaker in front of you for the red light to come on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Environment Canterbury Council. Thank you for the opportunity to submit on this important issue, the reflection of democracy and action, I believe. I'm representing three submissions to be heard. One in my name, Peter Lowe, a submission written on behalf of the Mid-Canterbury Independent Irrigators Society, which I'm the current chair, and a submission on behalf of the Hekio Heinz Water Enhancement Trust, HH Wet, of which I'm a trustee and the chair. My family farm in the Heinz catchment, farming sheep, deer and crop. I have a history of working for my community in the environmental space, starting with the Heinz Grange Working Party. I'm proud of the relationships I've built up over that time. To begin, as I speak as the chair of the HH Wet, I would like to acknowledge and sincerely thank Environment Canterbury, along with Ashburton District Council and the Crown, for the ongoing support given to the Hekio Heinz Managed Active Recharge project. I believe the submissions from myself and Mid-Canterbury Independent Irrigators have a similar theme, and I'll combine those and speak to those first, and then speak to HH Wet submission second. And in that, I hope I can offer some.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I don't think we've got the third submission that's being talked about, the Heinz SharePoint, but we haven't got a hard copy.
No, I think it was a mistake on my end. I submitted two submissions from the same email address, and I don't see one.
Yeah. The name of that other submission that's on SharePoint, the code for that. Do we have that? Yeah, thank you.
I believe the submissions from myself and Mid-Canterbury Independent Irrigators have a similar theme, and I'll combine those and speak to those and speak to those at the same time. And I'll speak to the HH Wet submission second, and I hope in that submission that I can offer solutions to Environment Canterbury. I'm sorry to report that many farmers in my district are in denial of the MPS FM20 is real, and denial that the proposed Environment Canterbury rate rise will happen. You have heard from residents in my district reporting a proposed 80 to 100% rate rise against proposed Environment Canterbury regional rate rise of 24%. As a rural landowner, is it intended that I have a much larger rate increase than our urban counterparts? Is that fair? The proposed rate increase is causing considerable concern among the rural community that I'm part of. That is the farmers that are aware of this and not in denial. I believe more of the proposed charges should be set as a uniform annual general charge across the rate bars. Environment Canterbury also needs to be financially responsible and trim budgets to must-have projects and discard the would-be nice to have options. I also believe Environment Canterbury should not be borrowing for operating expenditure or natural capital as described in your long-term plan. Borrowing is a tool to fund capital expenditure that can be depreciated over a number of years and generations and not for day-to-day expenses. It also needs mentioned that the Environment Canterbury online rates calculator tool contains errors, and this is added to stress for the ratepayers in my area. I'll speak to the HH Wet submission now. The Hikio-Hines Plain supports some of the most intensive agriculture in New Zealand, and with that is well known, it is well known in my district has serious water quality issues. It is also well demonstrated that residents in my district have taken ownership of those water quality problems and are active in working to address them. The Hikio-Hines Manage Aquifer Recharge project is part of the solution for my district, and as such, I strongly support the MAR targeted rates. The ratepayers in this project, the ratepayers that this project affects, should be the only ones to make the decision on MAR targeted rates. I request that Environment Canterbury be transparent in its decision making here. Funding is required to install capital works to address the effects of agriculture from past generations and present, very much like urban wastewater infrastructure is funded and installed to counter the effects of urban development on the environment. The solution I offer is for Environment Canterbury to continue to give effect to the Plan Change 2 and the forthcoming Environment Canterbury MPS FM20 planning legislation. As you will be well aware, Plan Change 2 requires farmers to achieve a 36% reduction in nutrient loss by 2035. That is in 14 years from now. You have heard from MHV Chief Executive Officer Melanie Brooks that Minister David Parker defines a generation as 25 to 40 years. The Hikio-Hines Plain is on a path of continued environmental improvement. I stand by that statement. It is evident by the on-farm mitigation happening and the catchment-wide projects such as MAR. Also, this is demonstrated by a comprehensive groundwater surface water monitoring program funded by HH Wet and MHV Water. A path of continued improvement water quality is a requirement of Minister David Parker. It is recognised that the existing Canterbury Land and Water regional and sub-regional plans are industry leading, and I congratulate Environment Canterbury for this. But I question the proposed spending to give weight to the NPS FM20 bottom line limits if this kills all previous plans. Plan Change 2 was hard won in my catchment. It was expensive and time consuming, but Plan Change 2's outstanding achievement was empowering farmers to accept problems and accept change. I spoke earlier of farmer denial. My very real concern is if PC2 is scrapped, that will mean considerable farmer empowerment to environmental improvement will be gone. The NPS FM20 states that long-term visions must set goals that are ambitious but reasonable, that is difficult to achieve but not impossible. What I must make very clear is that the target of 2.4 milligrams a litre of nitrate in some of the Hikio-Hines Plains surface water bodies is an impossible target in the short to medium term. I urge Environment Canterbury councillors to please view the existing Plan Change 2 targets not as an end point, but as a necessary step on the journey of continued improvement in the Hikio-Hines Plains environment. In doing so, I believe this will achieve considerable cost saving to ratepayers and will ensure continued support from the district. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions if I can.
Thank you, Peter. That was a compelling submission. Peter.
Just taking you back, Peter, to short to medium term and your experience. The short to medium term go out to 2035. What does that? You said it's going to be hard to get there in the short to medium term.
Well, what I meant was
your button, Peter.
Sorry. What I meant is Plan Change 2 is working, and that that has a life till 2035. And our target at 2035 is 6.9 milligrams in the groundwater and surface water bodies. I would suggest that that's a point along the journey, and the 2.4 is considerably further than that. Phil.
Thank you, Peter. One of the comments you made was around the NAR, I think, was that the local ratepayers should be the only ones to make that decision. I just wondered if you could explain that a bit further.
Thank you, Phil. What I meant is that the people that are funding, the ratepayers that are funding that scheme or propose to fund that scheme, they were the ones that make that decision, not ratepayers in other districts.
And presumably bring their recommendation back to the council. Would that be okay?
Well, basically, what the comment was aimed at the submissions that I believe we've had a lot of support from our local community, Mr. Clearwater, and I just hope that comes through and it steers Environment Canterbury's decision making on that.
Thank you for coming up and giving us your submission, and it's good that you represent yourself and the MAR project and your irrigation company. That's interesting that you come from that perspective. Do you know if there's been any thought given by anybody? You know, you're saying that 6.9, that's got a projected date of 2035. Has any thought been given at this stage about how you can build the journey towards the 2.4 into that projection that you've got at the moment? Do you see that as a natural thing that could happen?
Thank you. Yeah, I do. I think we're on the path. The 6.9 is going to be hard to achieve, but it's not unachievable. And the point I was trying to get across was that if we go too far, if Environment Canterbury or the community goes too far with a limit that's not achievable, the farmers in the area, our farmers will not be on board with it. We'll lose all the good work that Environment Canterbury's done to date, getting farmers on board.
Thanks, Peter. Last question.
Thanks for your submission, Peter. I noted that you consider biosecurity and biodiversity to be part of our core roles. And I just wanted to ask if you wanted to expand on your comments about a concern that our Braided River or Murudako projects may not have taken into account long-term maintenance costs, and just what are your concerns there? Sorry, in your button, thanks.
Can you please repeat that question again? Sorry.
No worries. You've just got a comment within the biodiversity and biosecurity section of your feedback that our Braided River and Murudako projects may not have taken long-term maintenance costs into enough consideration. Are you talking about sort of planting maintenance for Murudako, or is there something else in there that you...
Murudako was the tree planting program that was proposed.
Yeah, I'm unsure of where that has come from. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. That would have been in the submission that was written by the Mid-Canterbury Independent Irrigators. It wasn't written by me, sorry.
Oh, right, sorry about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter, for coming up. Diana, for coming with Peter. Thank you for your submission. And your points have been well made, and we will consider them going forward. So if I can now call Colin Meurk to come forward. Colin, if you'd like to make yourself comfortable, loading stuff. Peter, if you've got additional material, if you could leave it with the staff back there. Yeah. And Colin, it's 10 minutes, and then a couple of questions. You have to push the button on the thingy
Okay, can that be moved over here or? All right. Thank you so much for letting another citizen take part in this important process. If I seem a little jaded, it's because I've just returned from leading the 8-day, 140-kilometre Christchurch 360 trail around the city, highlighting the biodiversity of our wonderful region and city. We'll have three key messages that I hope to distill out of my little presentation here. The first is, and I'm congratulating ECAN on being able to, in the future, as it has to some extent in the past, been a pathway to a kinder future and reconnecting people to nature and history. It's done some of this. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do much more. The first key message is that the business as usual is unsustainable. We face multiple, mainly ecological and becoming socio-political emergencies. You have declared some of these. And the economy exists within the social and the biospheres, not the other way around. This is a significant shift in paradigm from what we've all grown up with and what most people expect. We have to address this. The pandemic we've just had is just a small example of what we face in the future. What I see is one of the key elements in overcoming the fear and anxiety that comes from this realization is a stronger connection to nature and developing ecological literacy from that connection with nature. Okay, so starting from that point, biodiversity of our place is equated with our identity. It's part of our identity. It underpins our sense of place, our local environment, and of course also the cultures that have arisen out of that, that natural environment. So we have a duty and a necessity to protect all of that. And in particular, there's very little, as we know, on the Canterbury Plains. You know, only 1% or so of the total plains has still got any natural species occurring in its natural environment. There are still places where this exists, but we're still losing it. And I've highlighted a few of those. Streams. Water races is one of the things which I've been going on about for years. It's actually some of the most remaining natural bits of wetland and riparian environment left crisscrossing the plains. And they also have some visibility, which, as I've said there, is also vital to its survival. If it's invisible, if extinction of experience leads to extinction of species. So I've highlighted streams, water races, road corridors, hedgerows, fence lines, floodplains, and our very special and unique tri-plains grasslands. The other associated phenomenon, of course, is the biosecurity nightmare. And it's always a concern to me if it looks like we're trying to cut back on the huge task that remains out there, and which might be the last chance we have this generation to get on top of some of these exponential explosions of exotic plants and, of course, animal pests that blight the landscape and which are increasing all the time. It's very easy to lose sight of the notion of exponential growth, but I'm sure most of you understand that. Oops. Yeah. The third point, though, and relates to some extent how I feel myself, is donor fatigue. I've just come from a number of restoration projects with high schools and things, and working with a number of other people some of whom are volunteers, some of whom are paid. We need to reconfigure the consultation model. I mean, it's lovely to come and talk to you all once a year for 10 minutes, but I look back at my last long-term plan submission from 2018, and I'm thinking, how much of this actually sank in? How much of it actually got incorporated in what the council is doing? Is there a better way of engaging with what I call, sort of able, concerned, ecologically minded people? Many of these people, in my experience, are just completely overstretched and exhausted, and to some extent maybe feel not being listened to, even despite all of the effort that they put into it. We'll come back to whether one's got anything useful to say at the end. So it is personal. So hence my submission is a very sort of general statement. I haven't had time to read the long-term plan, for God's sakes, you know. But I know how important this and other councils are in fulfilling the future needs of the planet, of the nation, of the region, and of our immediate city here. You can read all of that stuff later. What I see as one of the ways of addressing this is to develop more kind of co-creative think tanks. I mean, the word co-creation has been around for a decade or more now. It's all the buzzword it was. You do have you know, technical advisory groups, and I'm on one of them, the biosecurity one, there's the water ones as well. We need also maybe to engage on that much bigger picture issues, the ones that I open my address with, and have open forums which can also get a wider sort of public input into that. You know, I've listed a whole lot of things here: integrated economics, future scenarios, transition engineering, regenerative agriculture, urban sprawl versus versatile soil stocks. I mean, I was involved this morning in a consultancy role in a development in Hallsville Township. And, you know, they're all going to be single-storey houses, you know, with their own little patch of space in the backyard. I mean, this is not sustainable. We've heard, I think, the Environment Commission or whatever it was came out the other day kind of pointing out this huge problem of continued destruction of our most versatile and most important soils, which our whole economy depends on. Anyway, and also the role of unique landscape, engagement with the nature and so on. We need to sort of have some big picture studies and conversations about that. Now, I've run a WEA course on creative transitions to sustainable futures from 2 or 3 years ago. 70 people subscribed initially. And in fact, I'd put up this as a research proposal 16 years ago to my own CRI without success, unfortunately. I guess I think personally I have some credentials and I would very much like to engage with the kind of think tank that I'm sort of talking about with my extended network and ECAN staff to formulate an envisaged future and stepping stones to that future. That's the key and critical thing, how you design means of getting from business as usual to a future state without frightening all the horses. How do we pay for all of this? Well, I think part of it is changing the paradigm of what constitutes success. We've got to stop feather bedding and gold plating everything. We just cannot afford this into the future. From a long-term sustainable tourism perspective, I think we've got so much to offer in Canterbury. It's not just Aoraki Mount Cook, it's also right here in the city, and that's what the 360 Trail was all about. Becoming a destination province of long-stay, slow tourism. We need to slow down. And the National Park City kind of concept is part of that, as I see it, is branding ourselves as a place to be and a place to come to. Providing preventative measures, accessible alternatives approach in transport, urban sprawl and prime land, etc. And of course, leadership, rates, infecting rates and staff, and without stopping all those additional urgent tasks which we need to perform. And I guess, I know it's challenging, but we need to be looking at flattening and spreading the wealth pyramid. It's not tenable, and even economists are beginning to say this. And we need to increase our staff on the ground and the outcomes that we're sort of going for. So I think finally, this was the last slide I had in my 2018 presentation. It's sort of, in a sense, not about believing what I'm saying is true. It's about having a precautionary approach. Every day we delay in addressing these, wicked problems will make it harder to overcome. And, you know, if you just look at that cartoon, I love it, really. I mean, here's someone putting up all these amazing, wonderful aspirations, just as I've done. And there's the guy in the back there saying, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Well, it's kind of funny. But that's sort of what I want to leave you with. And I suppose just offering my own service to achieving some of these goals in conjunction and collaboration in a much more sort of co-creative sort of fashion. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Colin. And I note I was at Lincoln with Wandering Willie, and I see he's still a pest. Phil.
Maybe so for a long time. Thank you, Colin, for coming, and glad you've survived that. Yet again, the 360 trail. Well done. Colin, I just really want to ask you about sort of how I guess we as a council might develop our consultation or meeting with groups. Like as you were present, I was pleased you were there for the water partnership signing, but as you talked about, there's a need to reconfigure the consultation model, and I just wondered if there were any overseas examples of cities too where in fact there was, you know, a better model than what we're doing.
When someone else talks, it will turn you off.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm not up with the technology here. Some years ago, I proposed and sort of established a Christchurch biodiversity partnership, which was modelled on a London biodiversity partnership. And that was basically a forum of conservation groups from all over the Greater London and all of the local small principalities, you know, the councils within the Greater London region. And actually, I believe that's actually stopped now. When I've sort of Googled it recently, it doesn't work, wasn't there. But we had essentially established this for Christchurch City, but they've never finally endorsed it. I mean, you probably remember it was actually supported by the council around the table, but the staff still haven't actually implemented it. And it only happens when I kind of ring around to people and get them all together to go and have that meeting. But the key point about it is having one-to-one discussions, you know, with key staff and planners and councillors, if they wish, you know, across the table, being able to kind of work together and work out solutions to some of these problems. Some of them are sort of, you know, quite practical management sort of things, like, you know, how do we manage native grasslands, and others are these much bigger picture issues about how we, you know, configure, you know, the whole kind of salary structure, you know, of the world. So I think, you know, that's about the best I can do in terms of other models. But, you know.
Thanks, Colin. Question from Lan and then John, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you for that, so generously offering you and your brain and your passion for this area. My question is around your big picture think groups. You won't have seen it in our LTP, but one of the changes that we're making in the way we work is different committees, and one is a climate action committee, which is sort of this overarching big picture thinking group. Trying to move towards a more integrated way of working. So do you think there is still scope for sort of separate groups that look at different things, or do you think there needs to be more of a sort of one conversation to be had? I don't know, interested in your thoughts.
I think a bit of both.
Sorry, in your button.
Oh, sorry. I think a bit of both. I think, you know, the scope for discipline-specific discussions, but that they should then come together in a plenary periodically to share all those ideas. I mean, I'm as aware as I'm sure all of you about the climate emergency. It's not something I personally get engaged with because I know there's heaps of other people dealing with that. But I'm often concerned about, when the environment is mentioned, it often seems a bit lifeless. It's often, clean air, clean water, climate, temperature change, e-cars, etc., solar panels. But it often seems to miss the actual living component of it. And so that's often why I use the word ecology rather than environment. And so I think it goes back to this, belief that experience of and engagement with and connection to nature is going to be a key component of any sort of long-term solution, and a switch from a very sort of material consumption orientated society that most of us have grown up with and expect in the future. And that's going to be a difficult ask. We have to take small steps that are digestible and can be accommodated with the appropriate information being sent out. So it's a big picture thing and involves a lot of people and expertise.
Thanks, Colin. My question is, it comes back to kind of the donor fatigue or the conversation. When I was out talking about long-term plan, we maybe have 20,000 rural farmers or people versus 600,000 people in Canterbury. And one of the challenges there is people go, I'm just sick and damn tired of writing submissions because we are such a limited pool. How do we have or broaden that conversation so that a limited pool who constantly feel maybe challenged or under attack if unprovocative, have that conversation with the intelligentsia or the experts or the groups or the parties? It's a real challenge for me of how we have that conversation in a rural context when it seems like so many erstwhile intelligent, informed people are having that conversation.
I think you almost kind of expressed it yourself. It is possible to go and have conversations between all these people. And I have myself. I know next speaker, Steve, I think, it works with farmers, works with greening Waipara, wine growers, etc. And we find them actually that they're quite human. And hopefully they likewise think we out of the city are as well. Look, I think it really is just about having more interaction and addressing these things. It's not about blaming someone. We're all responsible for the state of the world that we're in, me no less than anyone else. I understand that, but it's very difficult to kind of like be out on your own and make all the sacrifices yourself. No one wants to do that. But if you feel that there's kind of a collective mood and desire and willingness to do that, then you become the team, dare I mention it, the team of 5 million, or 5 billion as it needs to be.
Thanks, Colin. Thank you for your submission, and we appreciate you coming in and giving us the benefit of your thoughts, intelligent thoughts. If I can ask now Steve Urlich, 1149, you are a number, you come forward. It may not be obvious, Steve, but the rules are you get 10 minutes.
Kia ora koutou. My name's Steve Urlich. I'm a lecturer in environmental management at Lincoln University. I've been there for 2 years, coming up to 3 now, and I was the Marlborough District Council's coastal environmental scientist. And so that gives you some background into what I'm going to be talking to you today about. And so I was involved in working with the aquaculture community, the fishing community, looking at marine biodiversity, seabed habitats, water quality and sedimentation, so working with the forestry industry quite closely as well. Today I'm just going to support my presentation by turning our attention away from inland and looking to the coast, the magnificent coast that Canterbury has, and there is Banks Peninsula, Te Pātaka o Rakaiautu, and Kaikoura, which is also another really important coastal and marine environment. And to pick up on Colin's point, it's not only education, it's also information. The Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor just gave a report, issued a report on the future of fishing, and she said it's dark down there. We're limited by information. So what's the relevance to Environment Canterbury? Well, it turns out you have strong marine biodiversity responsibilities, which the Court of Appeal recently confirmed. So what does that mean for you in practice? It means trying to get information, working with the fishing community, working with iwi in terms of Mātauranga Māori, working with science institutions to gather as much information as you can about the environment that you're charged to manage out to 12 nautical miles. So you've got the Regional Coastal Plan that you took a decision last year to begin consultation, and I'm going to provide you with a bit of a... That one? Thank you. Right, so what's the opportunity? There's an opportunity. Land Information New Zealand, who I worked with in the Marlborough Sounds on a similar size survey in Queen Charlotte Sound, Tōtaranui, to map the seabeds throughout that magnificent waterway, which, like Banks Peninsula, is a tonga, and has relatively similar issues. You've got aquaculture, you've got cruise ships, you've got marine protection, you've got threatened species. And that was a very successful partnership because Land Information New Zealand and the government department are responsible for providing information on land and sea, and they have quite a significant budget. And through their high plan, they identify areas that are important for navigational safety. And it's no surprise that Banks Peninsula and Akaroa Harbour have been identified given the cruise ships and other vessels, bulk carriers, etc., that come into our waterways. What's the relevance to Environment Canterbury? Well, there's an opportunity to partner with Land Information New Zealand, and that is to deliver information using the same technology that will be incredibly powerful. And given this is a once in a one or two generation opportunity, I thought it was important to bring it to your attention. So I'm just going to play you a video from the Queen Charlotte Sound, and this was it gives you a much better idea of what I'm trying to get across, and I may need help on that. Here we go. There should be some sound to that. Won't get any sound? This will be available to you anyway, but I can talk to some of these images anyway. So what this survey revealed was undiscovered features that had never been seen before: rocky reefs, canyons, freshwater seeps coming up after heavy rainfall, high areas for biodiversity, shipwrecks. It also gave us the ability to understand what's underneath marine farms that had never been had a benthic survey. And this has delivered products that are available to the community. You can click on anywhere in the Sounds and you can find out the depth, you can look at videos, you can understand the shape of the seafloor. And importantly for the cruise ships, it gives a modern bathymetric chart which guarantees, as near as you can, aside from human error, navigational safety. And so there's a number of fascinating features there that they discovered. Okay, so what is multi-beam technology? So what it does is it sends out a fan of sound, and as it hits the seabed, the shape of the seabed dictates how that return signal, the speed and direction of it. And through that, you can tell if you've hit hard reef or soft sediments, things like muds, silts, sands. Why is that important? Different species, like in their terrestrial environment, have different habitat requirements, require those different substratum. So not only do you get accurate bathymetry, you can characterise habitats, you can then image them to get a baseline for biodiversity, and the water column can tell you about water masses and turbulence, as well as where fish school. So it's an extremely powerful modern technology. What are the benefits? well, the benefits to Marlborough that'll be unleashed over the next few years, given this is, if you think about it, a piece of important underpinning science infrastructure. So for depending on the specifications, and I don't know if they've been scoped yet, but for around $5 million, you can get extremely high bang for your buck. So you get seabed mapping in 3 dimensions, you get the different type, range, extent of different habitat types. You can identify biogenic habitats. So in the bottom left and in the middle right, you'll see these habitats that are complex. Just like terrestrial environments, those 3-dimensional habitats formed often by the living skeletons of marine organisms provide structure, they provide feeding niches, habitat for sessile organisms. That's where small fish can congregate at different life cycles, and really important also for sequestering carbon. There was a recent paper that came out in Nature that said the way we're using the seabed is compromising our ability to mitigate our carbon emissions. So those organisms capture carbon and they hold it. And it's also held in seabed sediments. And when you disturb those repeatedly, you not only damage or destroy the ability of those organisms to capture that carbon, but you're also remineralising the carbon back into the water column, which is exacerbating a phenomenon called ocean acidification. Ocean acidification is where the chemistry of the sea changes. And what happens is shellfish, for example, have trouble forming shells. That's a threat to the aquaculture industry as well as biodiversity. So we don't know a lot about our habitats here in Canterbury. And we need to, because if we were continually allowing them to be damaged and damaging their ability to capture carbon, it probably doesn't matter what we do on land, because the ocean has something like 15 times the amount of carbon. Shelf sediments have 9% of the world's carbon. And so we've been, without realising it, we've been damaging the ocean's ability to support life. And I'd say that's sort of, and it's been out of sight, out of mind. You can go out on Upper Harbour, as I do from time to time, my sea kayak, and it's a beautiful day and it's calm, and you might see hectares dolphins, you see seabeds, you think it's magnificent, this is pristine, but you can't see what we're doing to the seabed. And the Court of Appeal said, guess what, councils, that's your domain. So fishery sustainability is fisheries, but the biodiversity that actually sustains life is councils. You're probably sitting there going, we've got enough money committed to enough things. A lot of people have been coming here asking for money. My purpose today is to make you aware of the opportunity and the opportunity cost of not partnering with Land Information New Zealand. They have the survey in Marlborough, they went 50-50. The one I was involved with, council could not have been able to fund it otherwise. How do you fund those things on a self-sustaining basis? Well, in the council's regional coastal plan, they have coastal occupancy charges. And so that for every marine farm, every jetty owner, every mooring holder has to pay an annual charge. And that money under the RMA has to go back into coastal science, monitoring, compliance, policy. And so that's a revenue source that enables you to do some cool things, maybe with tangata whenua in terms of co-developing the regional coastal plan for Akaroa, or having these governance models that Colin Meurk was talking about that enable you for a place to work where you've got a revenue stream that is user pays to be able to better manage those areas for better outcomes and allow different communities' aspirations to be reached. So it's, if you don't have this information, it's kind of akin to standing on a mountaintop and trying to manage the land with cloud cover. So I'm aware that time's passing, and I just want to show you this cool wee animation. I'll skip that because I know time's passing. So this is the hidden infrastructure we don't see. This is what sustains life in estuaries and in shallow subtidal and deeper subtidal. The health and the integrity of those habitats is just like our indigenous forests. They cycle nutrients, they capture carbon, they provide habitats at a range of different life stages for different organisms. And without a healthy hidden infrastructure, then we're kind of we're in a lot of trouble. Anyway, so that is all I wanted to say to you, and to thank you for your time and listening to my koera.
Thank you, Steve. I was overruled shutting you down on time because it was too interesting. So. Questions? Liz, then Vicky.
Can we please see the 3D animation? Can we please see the animation if it works?
So this is a mussel farm that was established in 19... So this is two mussel farms that were established in the 1970s, one of the early ones, and they never had a benefit survey done. And red is shallow, and yellow and green colours fade out the deeper you go. And those are individual mussel lines, and there's backbones going onto mooring blocks that you can see off to the side. And this technology enables you to do that for salmon farms and mussel farms, enables you to peer underneath. And you can see under this farm, you can see those lines directly underneath those waste shell that have fallen, dead shells that have fallen down into the sand and silt sediment. That one's fine. That's the sort of habitat you would place a mussel farm over because it's quite homogenous and there's plenty of that habitat, and it actually probably adds a bit of diversity. But this farm actually is over a bit of reef, which you don't want mussel shell drop and mussel pseudo-feces to drop onto. So pseudo-feces is the stuff that mussels expel. They bound it up in mucus and pop it out, and that organic matter can change the composition of the seabed, much like the uneaten feed of a salmon farm. So this is powerful because then you can go to the farmer and the mussel farmer and go, can we shorten some of these lines? Can we shift the lines out seaward? This gives you information to guarantee the sustainability of those farms long into the future. So that's the Marlborough District Council doing that in Pelorus Sound at the moment, which is the engine of aquaculture. But we've got that also in Akaroa Harbour, and if we have greater aspirations for aquaculture, this is a great planning tool that you could use to do that, and you can understand carrying capacity, etc., etc. So that's the animation, Councillor.
Thanks, Steve. Vicky, and then Claire.
That's great, thank you. On the survey, the LINS survey, that's obviously around Banks Peninsula specifically, and I think it just went into Akaroa, not into Littleton Harbour, and then we've got much more coast along Canterbury. That bit of LINS survey that you showed, is that enough, or are there other areas you think we should also be looking at, and if so, can you prioritise them?
That's a great question, Councillor Southworth. Canterbury's got a massive marine area, and where do you start? And with the regional coastal plan, one of the first tasks I understand the policy team will be doing is doing a stock take of information that's known. And that will no doubt be through a recognised marine science provider. And through that, as long with models of hydrodynamics and sediment models of the seabed, you might be able to predict where areas that might be hotspots are. So that's an exercise I think is like the first step for the regional coastal plan. What do we know? Where are the gaps? And what do we need to fill? This, in essence, is a survey of opportunity that is, and Land Information New Zealand postponed it for a year to give Environment Canterbury the chance to catch up and have these sorts of discussions and commission work from start. But they won't hang on forever. And like all good projects, given it's an infrastructure project, much like a building, like this building, you would need to scope it quite thoroughly. But this is a great place to start. And if you miss out on this, it's not the end of the world. You might be able to still use that information, but it will be harder for a science provider to analyse it unless they are there right at the start, helping with the configuration of the multi-beam equipment and making sure it's calibrated to those habitat standards.
Thanks, Steve. One last question from Claire.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and mine does probably follow on from Vicky's question. You mentioned a figure of something like 5 mil, which I presume would be a contribution to the project. how much of that 43,000 hectares would that do?
That's a great question, and so that's ballpark. But it depends on how close do you get to the coast and what your specifications are. The closer you are in those small bays, the slower it is, the more expensive it is, because the deeper you are, the more information you get from that fan. But often closer to the coast is where some of the really high biodiversity is. It's complex. You've got these underwater, landforms popping up. What we discovered in the Marlborough Sounds is the amount of fresh water out there in Queen Charlotte Sound. We just had no idea after heavy rain. You can use the information for better coastal hazard prediction, inundation models, tsunamis, all that stuff. You can put equipment on the survey boat that tells you about sediments and about fault lines, which is really important. So it's something that I would highly recommend that you gave some considered thought to, and requested or directed staff to give you a thorough a briefing about the pros, cons, and the opportunity costs. But you don't have a lot of time, I suspect.
Thanks, Steve. Look, thanks very much for coming in. I can tell from the councillors they were fascinated with your presentation, so thank you for doing that. And if I can now call Nancy, please. Submission 1051. And Nancy, when you're ready to start, if you just push the button on the microphone in front of you, please.
My name is Nancy Borrie, and I have prepared a submission. I can leave a copy, but I don't have any fancy PowerPoints. My request is relatively simple. Please accord higher priority to the protection of Canterbury's groundwater resources and allocate sufficient funds to enable ECAN to undertake new and ongoing groundwater protection measures in its long-term community plan. These will, and who knows what's going to happen really, but in time, these could well be incorporated into the plans and policies that ECAN prepares under the proposed Strategic Planning Act and the proposed Natural Built Environment Act. But I'm well aware we're not exactly sure what we're going to get, but we've got some ideas. I acknowledge at the outset I am not a water scientist or a water engineer, and I'm well aware that many of you have far more qualifications in the water area than I do. But I make this submission as an individual with experience in resource management and prior to the RMA town planning, so I'm probably more a strategic planner, long-term planner, policies, policies and objectives, that kind of thing. So big picture thinking. The reasons for making this submission are, number one, water is essential for life. I recognise the competition for surface and groundwater at the regional, national and global level. And I consider this competition will only increase as the world's population increases and is faced with the effects of climate change. Secondly, groundwater is the source of drinking water for many Canterbury residents, but can be contaminated. And I've been aware since the 1980s of the high nitrate levels in Canterbury. I was warned when we had our first child not to make baby formula with the well water in Lincoln, but instead to use the university's water because of the nitrate levels. And a sabbatical, a USA, California scientist was having a sabbatical in Lincoln, and he was a bit horrified at the way we would dropping drums of chemical and disposing of chemical waste into the groundwater. He said, you'll end up like us. And then when I was doing some study in the 1990s, been at Canterbury University, I was aware of chemical plumes in groundwater and just some of the things was happening in the USA. So it's a precious resource, we need to look after it. Third point, Canterbury has the potential to become a major food producer for global markets. We've got good soils, climate, topography, significant alpine rivers, groundwater resources, an electricity network, infrastructure for transport, processing, manufacturing, local resources, urban areas with an established workforce and stable local and central government. We are very fortunate. in the next decade, I think Canterbury could potentially see an increase in intensive land use, food and fibre processing with the associated urban development and the consequent need for waste disposal. And there's global recognition, you'll be well aware of that, of groundwater contamination. And you just do a search and boom, it's all there. I thought the State of Washington Department of Ecology's comments in one of their publications was very relevant for Canterbury. And they said, polluted aquifers lead to health risks and great expense. Contaminated water and ingestion of toxic chemicals can cause illness. I think New Zealand's very aware of that after Havelock North. Cleaning up groundwater is overwhelmingly expensive. In Washington, city wells have had to be shut down, treatment systems installed, and new wells drilled to a greater depth in order to access cleaner water. Responsible parties incur costs, often in the millions of dollars, for cleaning up contaminated soil and groundwater. And so prevention is better than cure, I think, for everybody involved. And currently in New Zealand, we seem to be favouring disposal of waste to land via landfills and the application of wastewater to sea or onto land. And I'm conscious in Canterbury, some treated wastewater goes out to the sea, some goes onto land. Personally, I don't think we should send our treated wastewater into the marine environment unless it is of a very high standard, because we don't know the long-term impacts. But again, I'm not a marine scientist or anything, but we just don't know. So, but I'm not going to discuss that. Mine is, I'm going to focus on groundwater and the need to protect it from contamination. My concerns are that ECAN is equipped with all the resources and funding it needs to ensure it has a sound understanding of the Canterbury water and groundwater hydrology, so it can make decisions that ensure the water resource is sustainably managed and protected from contamination. And this, because it's a global issue, because so much of the world does rely on groundwater, there is a growing research knowledge base to draw on. But I can understand you will say it's not necessarily, we haven't got all the funds in Canterbury to do it, we need outside funding, but I think the money needs to be put into it to protect it. Secondly, that ECAN ensures local authorities and others involved in disposal of wastewater to land use internationally accepted best practice and regularly update their policies, procedures and practice. And again, I refer to the Havelock North incidents. That had life-altering ramifications for individuals and the community. Thirdly, ECAN undertake rigorous monitoring of groundwater for contaminants, and where necessary, discharge permits or water permits are reviewed in order to ensure that no groundwater contamination occurs. Fourthly, where groundwater is considered vulnerable to contamination, ECAN, when undertaking joint planning with local authorities under the proposed new legislation, Natural and Built Environment Act and the proposed Strategic Planning Act, where there's talk of joint working together and there's only going to be 14 plans, so you're going to have to work with a lot of local authorities. Ensure local authorities create groundwater protection zones in areas. And lastly, ECAN closely monitor local authority wastewater treatment plants so as to ensure treatment facilities are capable of treating the incoming volume of waste to a high standard, and if and when necessary, require local authorities to upgrade the level of treatment. One example, and that's that I've become aware of, is the application of treated wastewater to land from urban areas and industrial parks or zones in Selwyn District is being increasingly centralised to the Pines Rolleston wastewater site. And SDC, Selwyn District, is now recommending that Darfield and Kirwi also join the system. This, I would predict, will lead to urban expansion in these two townships, plus there is anticipated growth under the urban development strategy. In 10 years, I suspect the Pines Rolleston site could be handling a population equivalent of 100,000 people, plus trade waste. I've tried to find up-to-date figures, but of course we didn't have a census, and then we didn't have a particularly good census. So just doing some adding up, I've got approximately in 2019, 2020, there were 50,000 plus population in that Lincoln, Rolleston, Primpton, West Melton, and I haven't been able to assess how much population equivalence, the trade waste that would be that's coming off I-zone and the industries, the I-port and that kind of thing. Individual properties and communities east of the Pines Roddeston disposal site rely on groundwater. Will it be safe to drink, or will it become contaminated as a result of the increasing volumes of wastewater being applied to land? Now, again, I say I'm not a geologist. I don't know what your aquifers are like in that area. All I can think is beware. Does there need to be a groundwater protection zone created in Easton and Selwyn, similar to that created to protect Christchurch's water supply? Avoiding contamination is preferable to having to pay for cleaning up contaminated aquifers, and I'd question if that's possible, or digging deeper wells. And I recognise that the National Environmental Standard for Sources of Human Drinking Water 2008 permits ECAN to protect sources of human drinking water from being contaminated and unsafe for drinking. And you can decide. So there are a range of tools. You've got an opportunity. You might say, well, why did I come and raise this here? You're looking at your funding for the next 10 years, and I hunted through your document. Admittedly, I admit I feel a bit like Colin Meurk, that I haven't read your document totally and all your plans, but there is a range of tools. And who knows what the opportunities, the three waters, if it ever goes ahead, is going ahead, and the new changes, the alteration of our resource management system into strategic and natural and built environment. One more minute. It's a challenge to predict groundwater, but I'd like to think that ECAN allocates sufficient resources so that staff are able to give sound and timely advice to decision makers, councillors, commissioners, environment court judges, ministers of the Crown, who are going to be making decisions about the future of Canterbury's water.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for a very well thought out submission. Questions?
Yeah, thanks so much for your submission, Nancy. I just wanted to pick up on the main thing, being groundwater. In our plan, we have, I think, it's $3.6 million for added investigation into our groundwaters. What we know, I mean, even hearing the sums that Steve was mentioning for adequately assessing our marine environment, to adequately assess our groundwater systems would probably be magnitudes greater than that. Would you support added expenditure and us better understanding our groundwater systems at the outset? And sorry, I've stolen your button, so you've got to push it again.
That's okay. Yes, you could put in more funds, but you're going to have an opportunity under amended legislation to do almost a precautionary principle approach. You could almost see if you could start working towards those things. I'm conscious, I did a research project years ago when I was at Lincoln. Since the 1960s, North Canterbury Catchment Board and others have been doing research on water and groundwater. It's been going on ad infinitum. When do you stop saying, look, we know what we know, let's set something in place. It's better than waiting for another 5 years to get the ultimate information. And one of the comments they make in the end, if I can just say, I realise that what I ask is costly, but that is the price we as residents of Canterbury must pay if we want safe water supplies. The alternative is potentially far more costly. So yes, it is costly, but there's maybe ways that it can be done under the new legislation. That's why I raise it.
Thank you, Nancy. No more questions, in which case I will adjourn the session of...
I'm not going to make a submission, but I've got just some housekeeping.
Oh, housekeeping. So we're not adjourning anything, and then will you close after?
Housekeeping tomorrow, councillors. You've got the list for tomorrow with your papers. Hamish Rooney from the Waihoa Ellesmere Trust. There's 1167, which I've got copies, which I'll give you now. They'll be here about 12:30. And Rebecca Winnans, who was unable to attend today because she wasn't well, she's coming at 12:30 also. So I hope that works.
For you, Megan, you will close, will you? Please, thank you.
Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui o tāne. Kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana. Te wairua I te ara tangata. Koe a rai rongo, whakairia aki ki runga, kia tina. Haumi e, hui e, kai ki e.